Hello, everybody! If it's Saturday, it's RantCast. I am, the magical Mr. Mephisto, if you're not into the whole brevity thing, here with my guest tonight, or today, actually, is the illustrious, Vince Venturella of Warhammer Weekly fame. I'm sure you've heard of him a time or two.
I don't know about that. I'm sure there's plenty of people who haven't. That's fine. Probably better that way, I suppose. But yeah, man, what's going on, buddy?
Oh man, not much. This episode I feel like has been a long time coming.
Literally because we've been trying to get the schedule together for a long time. Yes, that's an accurate statement.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and it lined up Saturday, midday. Nice little afternoon snack for everybody who wants who fancies themselves ready for a rant. Who is this guy? Says narcolepsy. Never heard of him. so yeah, man, a lot happened this year in Warhammer, in Age of Sigmar, and this just feels like a great sort of bookend to an era for us to just kind of go through some topics, maybe rant a little bit about the Slaanesh and Ossiarch Bone Reaper dynamic and what it means to be a boogeyman. We'll probably meander on the FAQ, talk a little bit about this newfound fiasco with Always Strikes First, Always Strikes Last. Not that it's new. As stated, it was in the Beast of Chaos Wildfire Taurus, under Wildfire Taurus. But it's kind of been codified into the general FAQs, which then puts it in the foreground. It's not just, if this happens with the Beast of Chaos thing. It was really saying this is game wide now. And so I think there's still some talking to be done on that, because it's just,
yeah. I say the least.
Yeah. There's still some talking to be done there, and then I'd like to do, do like a literal interview, ask you a few questions about Warhammer Weekly, how that came to be, and how it went on to basically be the preeminent show, I think, for Age of Sigmar. But first, if you're stumbling into chat, if you're watching back on YouTube right now, you see this awesome robot up on my screen. This is a fucking glitter boy from Palladium Books Rifts RPG. The art by Long and Simbedia. It's one of those images that as a kid I saw and I just went, God, it was like 6th grade. I went over to my friend Sam's house, and this is actually the same Sam who would get me into Warhammer Fantasy Battle. And I saw this, and I'm like, what is this? I need to know what this is.
Sure.
And you actually have some experience with Palladium Books and Rifts RPGs, don't you?
Oh yeah, quite a bit. Been playing since the 90s. Yeah. Just ran a marathon for Rifts like 3 weeks ago. So yeah.
Yeah, you I was talking to you, and I think it was actually, whether it was on your show or before we went live, or if it was in person one of these times we've kind of intersected. You kind of do like a holiday, like an RPG holiday.
Correct.
You want to just talk about that a little bit, like what that is, what that entails, and how
Sure,
that came
man.
to be?
Yeah, so 3 or 4 times a year. So I'm about to do another one next weekend, because we actually do one after Thanksgiving and one after Christmas. So those two are generally back to back, quite close. Then we often do one in the summer, and then sometimes one in the spring. So that's how that all works out. We get together. There's the exact group members vary, but there's sort of a core of us, and then there's an ancillary group of satellite players. And we lock ourselves away for 3 to 4 days usually. So this will often do something like, here would be a standard schedule, like what this one's going to be. We'll start on Thursday night, say after people would be off work. Everybody takes Friday off, and then we play all day Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. So let's call it 3.5 days. We'll generally start playing about 11 a.m., noon, somewhere in there. We'll go till 2 in the morning, something like that. We don't generally break too much. Like, we'll just bring food in and eat while we're playing. So call it, 13, 14 hours for 3 days, plus another 6 to 8 hours on the first day. So we usually get, 45, 50 good hours of gaming in, which if you're, to put that in perspective, if you're playing in a normal campaign, well, sort of some kind of weekly RPG game where you're playing 3 to 4 hours a night, right? Mm-hmm. That's, 12 of those games in. So it's a good 3 months, 4 months of play. We'll manage to get in over a weekend.
Yeah, and the handy thing about doing it that way is the pacing. When you run a traditional weekly style, you usually have a build up and a cooldown period like week to week. So every adventure might start with a recap, or hey,
Yep.
you settle in at the table. It takes you time to get into that 4 hour session a lot of times. You
Mhm.
actually, by running it that way, you're also kind of I think maximizing the efficiency of the game, because
Yep.
you run through. I mean, every DM or GM has their campaign notes that go adventure 1, adventure 2, adventure 3. With that style, you go this is the campaign, this is what we're getting through in 50 hours or whatever. So
Yeah, I mean, here's the best way I would do it. Here's the best way I would describe it. It's the difference between, so if you've ever GM'd or ever played in a game, in an RPG, it's the difference between a television show, writing a television show, and writing a movie. Okay, so when I write my marathons, I write them in act format.
mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying? Like, I know what my act breaks are.
Mm-hmm.
So start with an outline, then I break it into acts, then I fill out the scenes, and then I edit in the connective tissue, and so on. But I can tell a full story, a beginning, middle, and end. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
As opposed to when you're a weekly game is often much more meandering, right?
Yeah.
You'll have probably multiple stories going on, maybe multiple storylines. Whereas in this format, I'm able to much more tightly control the specific story I'm telling. And we started doing this back in 2008. We've been doing it now for 11 years. And eventually it evolved to where we broke out of the single movie format, just as Hollywood inevitably will do.
Uh-huh.
And we started doing, continuations, trilogies. And right now, actually in Rifts, I'm building my Marvel Cinematic Universe.
Oh,
So we've done probably 8 or 10 games now, with multiple GMs who just set it along the same storyline. Like, it's my main storyline. I'm the Feige of all this, but I'll trust other directors, of course, to come in and work. And they just tell an ancillary story. But I'm building towards a broader narrative, right?
Well, Rifts is actually you compared to the MCU. Rifts was kind of the MCU before the MCU. It is the multiverse, quote unquote. I learned multiversal theory because of Rifts. I was a nerd first, and I got into the science of it later. But Rifts is multiple. The way Rifts is run, they've got their conversion book to incorporate all their other Palladium settings. So you can run Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Well, now it's After the Bomb stuff. After the Bomb, mutant animals in Rifts, because they get teleported in, or whatever. You can run the Robotech and the Macross stuff, because that stuff's all under their system. You can run Wormwood. You can bring in their fantasy setting, which is PFRPG, which is a unique setting in and of itself. Not to linger on this rabbit hole too long, but the world is actually flat in PFRPG, and you can fall off the edge of the world. But that's because it's in its own little pocket dimension, and so it's kind of a little sort of a Discworld-esque setting. Right. But yeah, that multiverse really ties in real nicely. So you said you're setting up your multiverse, your cinematic universe.
That's right.
Continue.
No, it's fine. Yeah, it's an interesting setting. It's some of the worst rules around.
Yes.
Yes. As an actual mechanical system, yes. You have to just throw stuff in the garbage.
AR.
But and yes, he's as to prove your point to LLV's point in the comment. The multiverse thing goes back obviously a lot farther than that. I don't think
right.
You mean this was your introduction?
That was my introduction. That was my introduction. That was my introduction. Yes.
Yeah, and it's great because it is a true kitchen sink setting. That is to say, anything goes. You're talking about a game where your available choices of things you can play, right, include everything on the spectrum, from a homeless guy who can kind of drive a car and might own a gun.
Vagabond, okay. And he gets a bar of soap in his starting equipment, one of the only classes to come with a bar of soap and a bag of candy.
Sure. So that's that's the bottom end, up to literally the son of Zeus.
Yeah.
A godling. Or not even above a god, above the son of Zeus.
Yeah.
Truly a godling, somebody who is the scion of a god and another god. Uh-huh. Right? And as powerful as that is, it is a world where the big bads are far beyond that.
Yeah.
Right? They are cosmic level threats on a like Thanosian scale, right?
Yeah. Yeah, you have
Yeah.
alien intelligences, the Splugorth, like, which are to call Splugorth like Cthulhian would be a disservice to Cthulhu, because they're not like maddening, and they're just like these, like, just the super sci-fi technology, bioengineering weapons. Like, humans are they
They're
don't even rank.
intergalactic. Yeah, they're
Yeah,
just intergalactic tentacle-based capitalists.
yeah.
Well, they are. I mean, they want to own worlds, and they're just tentacle monsters who own Super Facebook or Amazon.
Yeah, yeah.
That's all it is. Like,
Yeah,
no
yeah,
big.
they're the Jeff Bezos of like a multiverse.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
and
That's what makes them great. Like, if I've used what's his name? The squid in charge of
Splincryth?
it, like, yeah, Mr. Splincryth. Thank you.
Yeah.
Like, he was an NPC in the first game, like where people just met him and were talking to him. He was rather cordial, because I find him to be an eminently fascinating character. Since this is RantCast, we can just go on these sorts
Yeah,
of
let's go. Yeah, well, let's go.
diatribes. I find him to be a fascinating character because he's and all of the way I run riffs is always to put my own spin on things, as all of us
You
should do with our
should. You
game.
should. Yeah.
I find canon to be the absolute most boring thing in the universe. Like, that's cool that some other writer thought that's how that should be portrayed. I don't care at all. I'm going to portray it what makes sense to me. And Splintcryth is a fascinating Splugorth because he owns Atlantis. It's this interdimensional trading hub, one of the best in the galaxy, and a lot of his kind have whole sections of galaxies they own, right? And he himself owns many worlds. But he's not really intent to conquer the world. Like, sure, I'm sure he'd do it if it was, put handed to him on a silver platter. But he seems like the kind of guy who's just like, yeah, I don't know. That seems like a lot of work,
Yeah.
And there's other stuff going on. Like, I'm fine. I'm cool here, man. This is basically paradise. Like, he's living in one of the sweetest places, in the world. Everything's relatively peaceful by the standards of Rift's Earth. He's got his armies. He's got people who fawn over him all day. He's just chilling out at his, like, he is basically at a Sandals Beach resort, and
he's made
feeling good.
Yeah, he's made Atlantis into his entire little resort town. Like, the lost city of Atlantis in Rifts returns because, like, the Rifts just do a bunch of stuff, and I believe that there's a couple different, like, canonical reasons for what happened to Atlantis, but the main one is it rifted out. Like, it teleported out of existence. And so it gets teleported back in, and he's just like, he's made it into, we always, so, like, I was talking a little bit ago to a friend about how, like, every campaign I have ever run on a long-term scale always has what I call the Hot Springs adventure. Now, this is a metaphoric hot springs. It's not always literally a hot springs, but it's usually like a downtime adventure in the third act break, right near the end, before you've got all the pieces of the puzzle together. Now it's time to confront the big bad, and then you end up at a hot springs, and then, like, the complete side plot weird antics that are like an inversion or a reflection of the main campaign happens. So I always have that. Atlantis is, in Rift's Earth, as it's portrayed, the quintessential hot springs town.
Yeah, we did both. I used it as part of the setting to sort of kick off the initial game. And then we've actually, there was another buddy of mine who, in this great cinematic universe we're building, ran a whole game where we were all Atlantean characters working for, one of the High Lords or whatever, who were like one of his, because he has like, they have these task forces that go out and do various things. So we were all weird.
Hate vampires is one of the main task force.
Yeah, sure. We were there to solve problems, because in the first game, Splintcryth gets basically mortally wounded at some point early in the game. He's not dead. He's very hard to kill, but he gets mortally wounded. And then all this interplay and interpolitics happens. And so we get caught up in this internecine Atlantean politic. And it was it's like, let me see if I can sum this up. This is why Rifts is a fun game. Because we were all playing weird alien monsters, working for ostensibly the bad guys, working for the best of the bad guys. We were the least bad guys, right? Getting into an adventure where we traveled around the coast, fought dinosaurs, got involved in time loops, other versions of ourselves from other dimensions were summoned, and then ended up that the big bad was the manifestation of the power of secrets. Okay? And we had to defeat him with the truth.
I need someone to play a metal guitar riff in the background of that right now. That sounds so fucking hardcore.
Yes, like that right there is why it's a fun world, because you can just it's madness.
Riffs.
It's just madness.
Yeah.
Oh, the time traveling was at an old NASA site, of course.
Right. Hashtag riffs. This is riffs.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, like it's cool because like riffs is kind of like the quintessential like Three Stooges effect of big bads. Like the only reason Rift's Earth hasn't been destroyed again is because there's so many super powerful evil things trying to destroy it at any given time that they
all keep each other in check.
Yeah. So like Splincrith or Splincrith or however you want to pronounce it, Splincrith is like he's just like happy to be like an intergalactic or interdimensional super capitalist, and then you've got like literal Nazis on North America with the coalition states who, like, during the Dark Ages when the rifts first opened up and the Earth was all chaos, they kind of like fought back all the demons that came pouring through the gates, but then they decided that they hated all DBs or dimensional beings, so they became like racial purists and like human Nazis and stuff. Like, it's like they have literal Nazis with technology. And Dead Boy armor, I'll actually try to pull up an image here. Dead Boy armor just like Warhammer,
it skulls everywhere. Yes, they love the skull motif.
Yeah,
they have skull ships and skull walkers, and all sorts of things like that. Yes, they love them skulls.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's an interesting, fun, kooky world that you can just tell a lot of really crazy stories in, and that's one of the things I enjoy. Like, as this connects back to Warhammer, to bring it back for some people who are watching, like, the reality is, not that I wouldn't love to just sit here and talk riffs for a few hours, but
it's the bad rules, but a good setting, right? Like, yeah,
it's bad rules, good setting, a lot of interesting narrative possibility. But what I love about it is the ability to do almost anything with the setting. So I think what I value at this point in sort of my, role-playing career / wargaming career / nerdism is something that tells me a story in an interesting way, right? Or a world that allows for unusual storytelling.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? So things like the Old World or Forgotten Realms or stuff like that, they're fine. I'll happily sort of experience those worlds. But and you can certainly have great character beats and interesting moments in there. But I like to be surprised by the world as well, right? And so things like the Mortal Realms, where it's this big, broad, expansive, anything is possible place. Things like Rifts, which is the same exact story, right? Worlds like Planescape in D&D or something like that, right? Those are ultimately the things that speak to my heart, because they all have a similar thing in common in that they are big, nearly to the point of infinite. They have diffuse power. That's one of those things that interests me greatly, where like there are multiple multinational actors, all who vie with each other for power. Yeah, so it's not just like when you think of the Old World, okay, who were your actors on that stage? Well, it's just the armies given form, right? Like there's the Empire and stuff like that, and they are what they are. When you think about a world like Eberron or Planescape or something like that in D&D, who are your actors? Well, yeah, sure, there are nations, and they're vying for power all the same. But there's also like if we're to take Eberron just as an example, there are also like the dragon-marked houses and the Aurum, and those things aren't constrained by sort of national borders or racial lines even or anything like that. So you just have all these different people. It leads to this sort of intrigue-laden plotting you can do.
Yeah,
that's always what I like. That is my cup of tea, right? Yeah. And it's the same thing in the Mortal Realms to a degree, where you have not only the manifestations of all the grand alliances, but then the sort of plots of all of them. What I'd love to see them do is develop more stuff like Warcry did for Chaos, where it shows these other power centers, like the tribes, the Chaos tribes out there, who are quite powerful and are now seeking to get themselves to the next level. I'd love to see them explore things like, witch hunters and inquisitors who are acting, across the realms, or just, you know what I mean? There has to be other social groups that are developing, and I think stuff like that is pretty great.
Yeah, you're not wrong. I mean, the thing that really does it for me is very similar to what you said. I like that infinite that like has character though. It's not like a nebulous sort of infinite. It's very infinite in scope, but very there's so many details and sharp edges for you to catch yourself on as you're kind of stumbling through this infinite span. So I think that's very important that you have. I personally, me, the creator of my plots and my stories, and when I'm using somebody else's world, the thing that allows me to play in Rift's Earth is because I can very much put my own spin on everything so hard while still drawing from the sort of established commodities that are there. Whereas like Greyhawk was very, very boring to me as a setting because it was like just it felt like everything was a fixed point in space with like, yeah, you can change stuff, but like at one point you change stuff so much that it's not Greyhawk anymore. Like Rifts is like you can change Rifts in a number of ways and it's still Rifts because that is its setting. And I think that's very important. Another aspect of Rifts is something you hit on really early on, and I think this also ties in with Warhammer, and part of the reason why I've kind of softened my opinions on certain aspects. Rifts has garbage rules. They are horrible. But like what I found is like as I was running Rifts, a lot of my home brewing and rules design and a lot of the stuff that interests me from like a mechanical stance, a lot of that has its origin in trying to make Rifts a more balanced game early on. So like
which is the wrong way to go.
Right. And it took me 24 years to realize that the best way to handle Rifts is just kind of let it be its thing and pick a couple things that you really want to like hammer home for that campaign. So, for instance, ranged combat. Like if you end up with a party of like gunslingers and grackletooth gunfighters and all these like really cool, you're gonna like, okay, well let's refine the shooting combat because it's not balanced against magic, and I want to bring magic up so that I can have these magical villains, and so like I'm gonna apply shooting rules to like their spells, and so you do stuff like that with Rifts where like you go like I can't fix the whole system. I'm just gonna pick and choose these points of design as I'm going. Because what ends up happening if you try to balance all of Rifts is you just like you have this like sort of rules escalation where you just keep making rules to fix the rules, and then you make rules to fix those rules, and like you just end up with this like mess. And I've always thought that as a design point, you should lean towards elegant and simple. And Rifts, go ahead.
No, I agree. I mean, I think that like I think a lot of people decry something like, a lot of people talk about, and especially in the past couple of days, and we'll get into the ASF, ASL discussion later on. But I think that a lot of people will sort of question AOS rules or whatever, that kind of thing. And my answer is always like, no, it's actually pretty good.
Yeah.
For especially for the way I want to go. A lot of times when people recommend rules changes, they're not actually recommending better rules, they're recommending rules they like more, right? Because actually defining what makes a good rule is kind of challenging in gameplay. Now, there can be cleanliness in rules, and certainly we've been on a journey with that, over the course of AOS, and I think we're trending in a positive direction.
Right.
This whole thing we discussed is probably one of the few standouts. But on the whole, it's not bothersome to me if I'm still on board for everything else, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and the other thing is rules as they exist are just giving us a common parlance or a common way to interact with the system, right? Like, and like rules are very much just their necessity is very much tied to the thing that you're doing. Age of Sigmar rules, for the most part, you can find some corner case situations. They work very well for what they do. A charge roll is a charge roll is a charge roll. You know what this is. They rolling out box cards. The other part of rules is like having a feel to them. When you roll a 12 on the charge, that effect feels powerful, and then it is powerful on the table. Things like that where you want those rules. Rifts is like sort of rules, quote unquote, problems they're silly ones, but like with the world as big as it is, they really do work for it. I tried to, like, what was that game that Savage World or Savage?
Yeah, Savage Worlds did a rewrite of it onto the D6 system.
And what I found happened when it lost some of the chaos that defines Rifts. when they cleaned up the
completely.
rules.
It's a feature, not a bug. Yes. Like, this is one of the interesting things that because Robin Laws classically had this discussion that he had around, like, can you play a good game with bad rules? And his answer was yes, but why would you? Like, that gets in the way. Why wouldn't you just demand good rules of your system?
Mm-hmm.
And I understand what he's arguing for. Like, if this is the kind of stories you can tell, why swim upstream? And there's some logic to that. But I would argue that because that's sort of one of those things that work until you really think through what we mean by good rules. Like, in my estimation, so this is a discussion that went around a little bit on Twitter. In my estimation, the lack of keywords is a good thing, not a bad thing. Okay. So there was some discussion around keywording and like,
universal keywords, I think, was one of the big things brought up. Like, why don't we use universal keywords in Age of Sigmar the way other systems?
All that Magic the Gathering.
Yeah, right. Sure.
Yeah,
you'll see at home. I had to debate really hard on my wardrobe today. I was going to wear my Palladium Books shirt because I knew Palladium Books was going to come up, but I actually went with my Control Deck shirt. It just says Nope, and it's got the blue mana symbol for the O. For those of you listening to the podcast rather than watching. So I chose my Magic the Gathering shirt because I think a lot of people want to talk. The stack is what the immediate thing that came to mind when I saw the Activation Wars post FAQ. I'm just like, oh, we have a stack now.
Sure.
Right, but no, continue with your point.
No, my point is simply that when it comes down to it for me, and you think about the nature of how these things work. So why don't I like keywords? Because a lot of people, it seems like the obvious answer, and it is the obvious answer.
Right.
But sometimes the obvious answer isn't the right answer. Mm-hmm. So one of the things to me that's a feature, not a bug, of Warhammer is that the rules are very bespoke and contained on the scroll. Everything you need is there. And that tells you what you need to know about that unit. It doesn't have like a bolded term that I have to go reference in some other area of the book, right? If I understand the basic way the game works, how to move, how to shoot, how to fight, so just your standard 12 pages of core rules, as it were. Or not even that, because a lot of that stuff I don't really need to know. And I understand what these things on the War Scroll represent. I can play that War Scroll, right? Yeah. Now, there's all these other layers we can layer on top. Like, we can have allegiance abilities, and we can have, Stormcast chambers and
or when a War Scroll is wrong.
It's right in the app. I'm going to assume you're reading it off the app.
Right, you're reading it off the app where it is correct.
Yeah. So, that is actually a really big deal to making a game easy to play.
Yes.
Okay. Which, by the way, is why Magic doesn't just use the keyword anymore at common, right? If you look at a common, when it says first strike, it'll say first strike. This unit strikes, blah, 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 and it'll get the definition.
Yep.
And that's because they know that new players haven't internalized all this stuff. And if you make them go look this up, it's immediately a detriment to them playing. So that's number one. Number two, the scrolls feel better when abilities are more bespoke to them, right? And we actually want to be careful with some of this because they've already started using some very samey language on some things, and I'm fine with that. Like sixes being double taps.
Negates is the one that jumps out to my mind immediately, is the difference between negating and the similar language you see come up. Marathi, for instance, her War Scroll, what it said before when she couldn't take more damage, and then you read this Drakfoot thing and you go, is it negated? Is it prevented? Like, is it yada yada yada? Right. And you're like, that's where I think you run into some issues. But that's the one that jumped out immediately for me. But you're talking about the sixes for the double tap.
Sure, let's talk about sixes double tap, right? Mm-hmm. So this was famously the thing that Slaanesh sort of started doing and was the big deal, right? Mm-hmm. And now it's everywhere. Yeah. Everybody has sixes to double tap, right? Because
Bone
it's
Reapers
a super simple rule. Yeah. Bone Reapers get it in the Nadirite weapons. One of the Sylvaneth Wargroves, like everybody does it. Ogre Gluttons will do it if they're wielding two weapons, right? Like, and on and on and on. And I'm okay with that. Like, I'm fine with them finding a nice, simple execution thing, but they themselves need to be careful here because they're going to wander too far into sameness. Now, the things that I like are when War Scrolls are still bespoke. I'll give you an easy example out of the recent tome. Take Chosen, right? As sort of the leaders of chaos. When they kill something, everybody around them rerolls to win. Okay, excellent. That's a unique thing to them. One of your favorite examples, a thing that I think is truly a glorious rule, Hand of Dust.
I knew it was coming. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's. I know you love it, and I agree with you on this one completely. It's even though I think Nagash is a petty and ultimately weak.
We'll
being.
talk about the moral relativity in AOS very shortly here.
Sure. Hand of Dust is truly one of the greatest pieces of design in the history of AOS because it's so big and so important, and it stops the game to play a mini game in the best suspense building way possible, right? Like something's about to die, perhaps 50-50 shot. It's the coin of fate, right? Mm-hmm. And that's so exciting. I love that. So, but you might say, well, yes, Vince. Well, why don't we just keyword some things? Like, let's assume the 6 is to double tap. Sure, we could just call that a thing. But why, if we have the same language? If we agree we're going to have the same language, which we do now, 6 is to double tap all of the same language.
Yep.
And if we agree we're going to need to print the language on every war scroll because we have to make it readable so people aren't digging. There are games out there with like 95 of these keywords. Okay, like there are war games with like 90, 100 keywords. And so you look at a unit entry or something, and it just says like, and you look at a war scroll and it'll just say like fire, fiery, striking first, blah blah blah, and it'll have like 7 different keywords, and it says nothing. If I just game that game, I know nothing about how that unit works. I have to go look up 7 different rules, and then internalize them.
Yeah,
that's just bad. That's not good.
Yeah,
like that is simply inefficient, right? Rewriting the thing on every war scroll is actually the efficient option.
Yeah,
because it's what allows players to look at one resource and quickly know the information. If you want players to actually play your game, best piece of advice. So what am I getting by writing 2 extra words? Like let's assume we name that 6 as result in 2 hits. Let's assume we just called it double tap.
Yeah.
And just now, instead of every ability having a unique, cool, and flavorful name, it had a unique, cool, and flavorful name, and then in parens I put double tap. Who cares? What have I bought? Nothing.
Yeah.
Right? Because either I hide the text. Like the point is, yes, standardize the text. 100% do that. Right?
Right.
And you might say, well, yes, Vince, but then I can chart out rules interactions. I can say how double tap interacts with some other thing. Well, then I've just moved the ball. Right? Because again, if it's going to interact in some weird way, write it on the scroll. This is the failure of ASL and ASF, right? Is that the only one that explains how it works is Locus. Locus was the one that was correctly written. Because it directly says in there, what happens when you locus somebody and they are ASF or go ASF? Well, it goes back to fighting as normal.
Yeah.
Cool. Great. Problem solved, right? Like you just told me how to resolve any issues I might have. So it's not an issue of creating some magical framework that's going to solve everything. It's the same old challenge we've always had in game design. Write the rules, right? And write the rules in the most efficient, clean language you can and make it immediately visible to the player. Don't make them dig for it. That's all there is.
Right. You just went on a really long tirade to explain RTFC.
Sure.
Read the fucking card. Like that is in essence it's read the fucking war scroll. So RTFW, but like I think that is an elegant solution in and of itself. Like you can be efficient with your language, you can clean that stuff up, but the fact that it exists, that you're not hiding it behind keywords, does add personality to the game and to the units. Like it's not why, like instead of saying on the Mortac guard, just saying this unit has double tap, right? You boom, your war scroll, you save ink or whatever, even though that's disappearing too because we're digital.
That's not real, yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, that's right. Like so, boom, this unit has double tap. I've lost personality to that unit by not having Nadirite blades and telling me I have these superheated, awesome blades are what's doing it, right?
Yeah, and there's a deeper problem here, okay? And it's a psychological one from the point of view of a game designer. So I've talked before on the show many times about top-down versus bottom-up game design, right? Top-down to game design is how GW tends to work. Where they will. Okay. Okay. Top-down game design is where you start from the thing. You say, this is what this thing is. This is a Bray Shaman. Okay? Well, let's look at him. All right, how does this Bray Shaman work? How is he going to function? And you're not muted, by the way, but that's okay. Or at least I can hear you. Maybe they can't hear you. I don't know. Who knows how it works? Internet's magic. At any rate, the and then I define what this guy is from a sort of top-down perspective. I think about who he is, how he works in the world, how he acts amongst the beasts of chaos, and why he is what he is, and so on. Bottom-up game design is I look at the army of beasts of chaos and I say, well, I need a spellcaster. Who would be their spellcaster? Well, probably some kind of shamanistic dude. Well, what does that shamanistic dude need to do? Well, he needs to do X, Y, and Z. So then I write rules to that, and then I package it all up into something called the Bray Shaman, and I build to the top of the pyramid. You need to do a little of both in all game design. But in the end, top-down is going to give you much more flavor. Because bottom-up becomes box checking, right?
Yes.
We're missing this thing off the grid, so hence I need to grid it out. That's always boring in the end, and it makes everything feel samey. This unit, this army doesn't have a spearman unit or whatever. You can fill whatever thing you want there. So let me do that. When you keyword everything, people stop thinking top down and automatically think bottom up. They can't help themselves. Like, it will just happen. Okay, you can say, "Well, stop doing that. Well, just don't do that." Yeah, that's fine. That's like sending somebody who was a smoker for 50 years into a smoke shop and saying, "Just don't be tempted to buy some cigarettes."
Yeah.
Right? It's in your brain, man.
Our brain, yeah. I mean, we're built for pattern recognition and
right.
And
you're going to look at the unit and go, "Well, which one of my existing rules can I already apply here?" Rather than starting from scratch and trying to think of what I want to do. Right?
Right.
So it's just it's healthier for the game if you kind of force people to sit down. Now, what I'll say is, I know for a fact they do have a dictionary now. They have a lexicon that they keep, that the rules writers keep. So when they want to get out the sixes are double taps language, they have an entry that they just copy pasta from.
Perfect.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that was instituted back with AOS second edition, I believe, a little beforehand. But that was basically the first time we saw it. Was where they started putting that. Now it's grown over time. They didn't start with they didn't sit down and go, "Let's codify everything." They codified what they had, and then over time they built it. Does that make sense?
Yeah. You actually had experience in rules design, didn't you? You were a rules designer in. I'm not sure what game system or what.
Yes, I've written many books. This is one of them right here. This book that's my camera slightly off kilter on right now, but it's. There you go. Yeah. NGS, that book. This is the last role-playing game book I published. But I've written about 5 or 6 of them. I've consulted with different companies. I have different editions of D&D. I was a consultant on 5th edition D&D and so on and so forth. So yeah, I started writing rules in 2004 and they were all bad and I didn't know what I was doing. And my first book is garbage at a near impossible level to contemplate.
I'm sorry, I'm on call. 1 second. Keep going.
I'll keep talking. You're good, man. That first book is bad, but over time I learned a lot. Over the intervening 15 years of working with stuff, I learned a lot. So for me, it's always the answer that you wanna make sure that the flavor has more weight than anything else. Like, good rules are great, and they're great for us who go to tournaments a lot, and for people who care about nuance and that kind of stuff, and you want the rules to be clean and fun. But there's a point where sharpening the knife doesn't really pay dividends in the same way flavor does. There's a reason why Doug's lore channel is so popular. There's a reason why lore channels are some of the most popular stuff around.
Yeah.
Right? It's because ultimately people don't play the game because of the ultra fine, clean rules interactions at the tip of the spear. Right? A game has to work well enough. If it's a bad game, if it's poorly written, you'll lose players. But once you kind of hit a threshold, that diminishes real fast in what it pays back. But flavor and narrative and things that grab a hold of you, that you get invested in, that you get to be a psycho about, like you with Nagash, right? Yep. Where you're like, you are ride or die with that clown face idiot, right?
This is what I call the sharp edges.
The
sharp edges in something where you could make something perfectly smooth, you could make the most symmetrical object in the world, but it will be immediately jettisoned from memory. Because perfection doesn't interest us. We want there. You've got to have something to latch onto. You have to have those bits. A game that actually immediately pops to mind is it's Exploding Kittens. This is our main party game. It's a very simple rule. It's just the mechanic is it's Russian roulette. Don't get the exploding kitten or you lose the game. And so there's a small learning curve because you have to teach players something they're not used to, which is your step ends when you draw the card, and you can do as much as what you want before you draw the card. And this is just like the inverse of what like gamers are used to doing. We always draw first and then we take our turn. So as soon as you teach someone that mechanic, that you can do as much as you want until you draw the card, and then it's someone else's turn. Like that. Like once you get past that barrier, it's a very like straightforward game. The reason it's interesting though is because it's the oatmeal, and it's the comic book artist, like or web comic artist. It's the oatmeal's art and a premise of kittens are blowing up the world. Like, that's why you like it. Why aren't you just playing it with jacks, aces, kings, queens? Because you could very much do like an old maid style game, right?
Yep.
But instead, you this other game has, like in our circle of friends, this is the one we pull out when we're just getting ready to go do something. We'll play a couple hands of Exploding Kittens. Because of that simple, obvious mechanic, but then it's the personality of you're blowing up cats. Like this weird thing. The weirdness, the giving people something to love or hate, you like, is what makes games, I think, really, that's what allows us to latch onto certain games over other games. And your personality quirks are going to draw you into certain games over others. They're going to draw you towards certain armies over others. What you want from the game and giving people avenues to achieve those are very important. And the rules are not the totality of that, which I think is something the lead we tend to bury when we talk about rules and in a game. That they're supposed to.
Please don't mistake me. Like, I am not saying that suddenly is carte blanche to write bad rules. I hope everybody understands that's not what I'm saying. Rules still need to be clean. They need to be efficient. If they're poorly written, if they're poorly laid out,
do their job.
Poorly interpretable, yeah, exactly. Then it's going to lead to a negative time in your game, and you will lose players. So please don't think for a second I'm trying to excuse bad writing or bad design, because absolutely, absolutely, absolutely not. Let me be 100% definitive about that. However, there is a point where sharpening the knife will stop paying dividends, right? And that's something, that point is usually before us hardcore tournament people who want everything in legalese, so there's never ever a debate or a discussion. It's usually sometime before we're happy. Right? That's the challenge.
Right. And another thing is like, as we talk about rules, I like rules. This is a weird statement. I'm a rules nerd, but like,
I don't think that's weird at all.
You know? Okay. Well, I mean, you've made cash money writing rules, so obviously you don't. But there might be some people in the audience. There might be some people in the audience. I mean, this is, I like rules is a theme that travels from game to game and system to system, and even crosses platforms from the tabletop to video games and into reality. I think people need rules, like, right? But like, it's like, I like rules, and so it's fun for me to talk about rules. And I need to point out sometimes when I talk about design that I'm not like necessarily saying I have the best opinion on where to go with the rules. It's just, these are the things that I gravitate towards and like to think about and talk about.
Yeah, sure.
So just adding a caveat there. Real quick, I got to make a phone call for this water main break. We can take a quick intermission. I'll edit it out. I apologize for you in the live audience, but...
Or I can just keep talking.
Or you can just keep talking. Yeah, you keep talking.
Sure. So let's just, we'll go on a little discussion here about what I think about, like, sort of good and fun rules. To me, one of the things I do love about a well-written rule is I love it in the sort of, there's the idea, we've talked a lot about psychological profiles on my channel. So this is or psychographic profile, sorry. This is the Johnny, Timmy, and Spike. However, there's these other two things called appreciation profiles, Melvin and Borthos. And, Melvin's a really interesting example, because Melvin loves a well-written rule, and so do I. And a well-written rule is when it sort of seems to work and grok and everything aligns. And I think we've all felt that. Like, I think in Warhammer, there's something amazing about when you look at a war scroll, you look at the model, here is this thing, and then you look at the war scroll, you look at the rules, and you feel like it perfectly and uniquely captures what that thing is, and how it should act. And there's this complete verisimilitude, this moment of zen that happens that I think is a really unique experience that's pretty awesome. A recent example of that in my mind is somebody like Archaon. He has a lot of rules, but you could pick at most of these big gods kind of feel like that. And we can argue about how useful they are on the tabletop, and that's fine. How ultimately useful is Alariel or something like that's a perfectly fun discussion. And like is Nagash? I'm on this channel, so I have to pronounce it like he does. Is Nagash worth 850 points or whatever he got adjusted to now? 850, 880. I don't remember what they put him to. Doesn't matter. 880 probably. Is that's a separate discussion from when I read the War Scroll. Does it feel like by piloting this thing, I am running the, this is the appropriate rules for the Lord of all death, or this is the appropriate rules for the Grand Marshal of the Apocalypse, Lord of all of chaos, champion of the undivided, right? Like, it needs to feel like that. And I think that actually the new Archaon Scroll is a good example of something that does, because he has some of that's a lot of different abilities, of course. Doesn't always have to be, but he has a lot of different stuff. He feels impactful, important, powerful, unique, right? But even little scrolls can feel like this. I think about little tiny stuff like skinks, right? Where they exist in these little swarms and they do this cool like and run away from you thing. Like that's a great scroll, because when you read them, you're like, oh yeah, sure, like little lizards. They would hit and then they would run away, right? Like, yeah, super awesome. And you see this throughout the game. Like some of the scrolls really, really well, I'd say more do than don't, but really capture the feeling of that thing. And to me, that's way more impactful and memorable than having the rule exactly right. Again, it's not an excuse. I'm just saying, like, if I had to weigh one against the other, where am I applying my time? Because life is a question of opportunity cost. We only have so much time at the end. And if I was looking at it, I would say double down on the flavor, on the interest, on the cool factor every time. Because in the end, it's what makes me want to keep coming back to play that thing. When I got the new Slaves to Darkness book and started digging into it, and we'll review it depending on when you're watching this, you may have already, but we'll be reviewing it on Warhammer Weekly on the show on Christmas Day. It's such a uniquely interesting book, because like points wise stuff's probably expensive, and I'm not going to go into the full detail of it. We'll do that for the review. But time after time when I was reading stuff, I just loved everything about what I was reading. Like the demon princes felt really good, like their auras were meaningful. The auras of chaos, I was like, yeah, that's exactly how that should feel, right? And so on and so forth. Like just especially some of the new guy, like that Chaos Lord on Karkadrak or whatever he's called, whatever that guy is. He's just fantastic. As you look at the model, you look at those roles, and you're like, yep, that's that dude. It's exactly where he belongs and how he should act. So it's that kind of stuff that I think really matters and tracks with people. It's one of the reasons I loved Slaanesh out of the gate, and underappreciated how negative it was for everybody else to play against. So this can have a dark side if not properly balanced. There's a great example of where it went off the rails, but it's one of the reasons why I liked it, because when I was playing Slaanesh, especially in the beginning, I felt like, yes, this is how piloting the Keeper of Secrets should work, going up to the enemy and tempting them into this sort of euphoric state, and then just murdering them. Like, yeah, that's what I'm all about, man. That's what I came here for. Like, the Keeper has always been the thing I loved more than anything else. The very first Forge World thing I ever bought was the Forge World Keeper of Secrets years ago. And those kinds of play experiences, to me, resonate and end up sticking with you a lot longer than remembering that something was perfectly fine. Again, there's a floor here. If you get below a certain level of sort of rules efficiency or effectiveness, things fall apart, and that's no good, right? But there's a lot more room above that to explore. I think that looking at it right now, one of the big challenges with armies where the feeling that they have and should play by, this is something I don't envy. Sort of the way that they feel like they should play is likely to be a negative or deleterious effect on the entire game's ecosystem. So the classic example of this where it was really challenging is something like KO, where KO feel like they should show up and bring out the long guns and just start firing and decimate the enemy, right? That's how KO should feel. They should have these big giant boats. Those boats should be very hard to destroy, and they should unleash, right? Like just go weapons free, and there should be smoking craters where previously there were enemy soldiers. The problem is if you let that actually happen, like it did in the very beginning when that army
with Clown
came
Car,
out,
yeah, with actual Clown Car, yeah.
Yeah, or even pre-Clown Car, when just before they ratcheted down a bunch of the rules, right? Because they went in, remember, they did that initial pass, and they went in, they ratcheted down a bunch of stuff. It wasn't just that thing, right?
Right.
They changed a bunch of like high damage weapons to variable damage weapons and on and on and on, right? And how that felt at that time, it felt like what it should feel like. But if it actually plays like that, not only is it too strong, but it's not great for the game. And so that's a challenge when you have like the verisimilitude or the feel of the army is something that the game might not withstand so well. Nurgle's classically been in this position too.
Yeah,
right?
unkillable, tar pity, infinite resilience units. Like, well, now you're not playing the game anymore, right? Like,
right, exactly. It's a real challenge to try to like square that circle where the thing still feels like the thing, but it can't all the way be that thing. Right. Otherwise, the game goes real fast.
Well, I think and Petrifex is struggling with this a little bit right now. Is they're not dying, right? Like people are upset that their units aren't dying. I very rarely hear people actually complaining about like Ren 2 skeletons. Like they're really a lot of the time, it's just like, God damn it, these like unkillable blocks. That's the main complaint you read. And you know what's the verisimilitude here? It's they're made out of sweet ass dinosaur and god beast bones, so they're like really hard to kill. Well, you know. LON, oh man, I'm trying to remember who was telling me this story. I believe it was Ian was on RantCast. He was talking about people playing against Richie's Sylvaneth army, AOS 1.0, I believe it was, or beginning of 2.0 there. People felt like they were making progress on the map because they were just removing dryads in droves, but they had lost the game at deployment. And as long as people still felt like they were playing the game of Age of Sigmar, models were coming off, like, they weren't as mad at that army as, like, the Blob, Fire Slayers. This notion that you're not making any progress in the game is...
Oh, it's a very negative play experience.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And there's another side of that, which is some people actually really like grindy games. Like one of my friends, he loves Phoenix Guard. He loves Phoenix. Like he just wants to like have two armies that just march forward and grind. And, like, that's some people's, you know, where you feel like you're actual, like... friends. Right, but the point is, like, when you're balancing factors, the negative play experience is this, like, this term that we, like... I feel we need to be careful of confusing NPE as a design philosophy to be aware of versus the negative feeling one has when they lose a game. Or if they don't get to exactly play the way they want to. And how do you balance these two concepts? Because you have two people at the table, both with their own agendas. When your stars align, when you both have the same agenda, those are the best games, right?
Sure.
Look at our game at Holy Havoc, where now I think it's just logical that I own RantCast now owns Warhammer Weekly. It's a subsidiary of RantCast because... Haywo and I have owned you on the table, but like our agendas in that game was a chat with friends, right?
Right.
And so we at the end we got really grindy and crunchy because we had to finish our game, right? You have to have some resolution point, but we were already succeeding and having a great time just walking up to that table because our agenda in the moment, we could have been playing any army, any armies, and we would have succeeded with like what we wanted from that game. And 100%. I think that's something Age of Sigmar possesses that other games don't necessarily possess as an advantage. Like Magic the Gathering, I think you can get a little bit of that in Commander. I don't think you get it in Standard. Well, they're not Type 1s, Type 2 anymore. You don't get it in Standard, Extended, or Legacy. The goal, and the only goal in those games, is often to win.
No, well, that's just it. I mean, wargaming itself, and to a lesser, and certainly to a degree, AOS, is honestly a really unique game that I don't feel like we appreciate enough. Just how strange this animal is, right? That like. Yes, we're all playing to win often, and that's fine. Nobody's begrudging anybody that.
There's a win condition in the game. It's all right to play toward it. Like that's fine.
Right. Exactly. But at the same time, like it's such a different experience that we're also, like I don't remember in Magic ever being concerned with the other person's fun.
Right.
But I am frequently concerned about that in Warhammer. It's not just because of sports votes. I just mean in like normal games, right? That I'm playing. Anytime, but when I'm in like a tournament, I want everybody to be having fun at the table I'm at, right? Yeah. Whether I'm on table 1 or table 105, because it's just I feel like it's a better experience that way, right?
I when I say we play in 3 dimensions in Age of Sigmar, as I frequently do, I don't mean 3 dimensions as in 3D models. I mean like the galaxy brain. Like sort of multi-layered experience. Age of Sigmar is a game that is played in 3D. Magic the Gathering is feels like a linear experience for me. I love fighting games too. Fighting games are linear. Like even whether you're on a 3D map or 2, it's if then, 1, 2, 3, 4. You're moving toward a single fixed objective usually. Mm-hmm. Age of Sigmar starts from the moment you pick an army to play. With like a 3rd agenda or 4th agenda. Like to win might be in part of your if you're a person who just like you love winning. You love to win. You are going to gravitate towards the armies that win. But there's going to be something that breaks that is that tiebreaker vote where you go with one army over another if both armies win. Sometimes it's random. Maybe you do flip a coin. But like people who ended up on Slaanesh to grind out games. Even, people who just wanted to win games were like, but not like this. I remember seeing that starting to, take over some of the even more competitive people I know, where they're going, I want to win, but not like this. And that was my experience taking my Beasts of Chaos into Depraved Drove for, a game. I'm just I wanted these guys to be, awesome, but, I don't feel like my opponent got to play the game at all. And I don't know where that concern with my opponent's feelings comes from, because in other things, I am a true monster. I played League of Legends drunk for the first time, in 7 months a couple nights ago, and I was a monster. I was making fun of the people I had beaten, you just crush people in lane, trolling them hard, and that troll quirk of my personality comes out in general, but it's the difference between being an actual monster and wanting to be a WWE style wrestling heel in Age of Sigmar. I don't know, and this is something I talk and opine over infinitely because it fascinates me what makes this game different, and I have hypotheses. But I couldn't tell you for certain. I just think part of it has to do with the fact that armies tend to be an extension of the player in Age of Sigmar, in a way that so few other games are.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's partially because this community is somewhat smaller. It's quite tight knit, and in the end, because of the nature of it being a much more shared and lengthy experience. Mm-hmm. You play a couple games of Magic with somebody, it could be, a 45-minute round and it might be faster, right? When you sit down with somebody to play a game of Warhammer, you're going to be there for the next 2.5, 3 hours, and you're going to see them a lot. At most tournaments you go to, are going to be 60, 80 people or less.
Mhm.
You know, it's hard to get lost in the crowd here, right?
Yeah.
Um, whereas with other games or especially those you're playing online where you have this sort of
Oh, the nebula. Yeah.
anonymity,
Yes.
you know, it completely fades away.
What is it? Murphy's Law of Greater Internet Fuckwad.
Yeah, I mean, it's just the kind of thing where there's just no real comparison, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So, and to me, it's one of the things that keeps me coming back to this game over and over and over again is the shared community, is that shared experience. I think it is the most valuable part of everything we do in Warhammer. I consider myself truly blessed to be part of this community. I don't mean that like hashtag blessed as an ironic joke. I mean it like with all sincerity. Like it is just a bunch of good people that I really enjoy spending time with.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's great. So, like the number of people like yourself that I've met and now call friends, I don't have those kind of friends from Magic or from anything else, right?
I play D&D or tabletop RPGs. I always use D&D as a shorthand when I'm talking about tabletop RPGs because saying tabletop RPG takes way longer. Like I can't think of friends I have made just from playing Dungeons and Dragons because it is such a focused experience. Whereas like Age of Sigmar, like so I used to run Living Greyhawk. I have my like DCI card and all that stuff for RPGA card. I used to run Living Greyhawk. Not a single person, a single stranger who played in any of my Living Greyhawk games for 4 years.
I've got my Magic Rewards card right there. Look at that. Boom.
Whoa. Yeah, I'll bust out my Asnar Thrall card here. My wallet's in the other room. Not a single person in the years I ran Living Greyhawk is my friend now. You know? Like, I know some of the differences, but I'm very passionate about that as well. The point is, I've been around gaming nerdery my entire life. I have some very tight bonds with my core RPG group, but that really doesn't grow or expand too much. You know,
I mean, I've played a weekly D&D game for 18 years, and those are some of my diehard, truest friends in the world. But I didn't meet them through D&D.
Yeah,
I met them
Narcolepsy.
elsewhere. Like said it exactly. He's exactly right. Narcolepsy's comment. Yeah, like they are ride or die. I would take a bullet for these people, friends. At least as much as anything like any human, cold detached human like myself could have.
Right.
Such a human like animatronic could have such friends.
Yeah.
But they were already acquaintances, known quantities first before we sat down the table.
Yeah. Yeah, it's weird. Like I said, like I ran Living Greyhawk. I did at Gen Con. I'd always do my train heist, my Rifts game. So I did a train heist where a Chianku dragon in disguise tasks you to go heist a train, and it's one of the leyline trains from out of like the Federation of Magic, and so you have to like do this train heist. The adventure runs different every single time, even though it's the same notes. I ran that for like 3 years. Not a single person like that just I happened to play this game with become my friends. But yes, the friends I took into tabletop RPGs are some of my closest friends in the world, and they're still my friends. But it's like they're just different experiences. With Age of Sigmar, you have that length. You do have the personality. I think there's a role-playing quality to Age of Sigmar that's certainly something I enjoy. You know, that's why I become the bad guy. That's, you know, I love Nagash, and then Nagash in turn like infuses me with all my evil powers on the table to like crush my enemies and hate them. But like so like I roleplay a little bit at the table too. So there are those elements that I really value in all of my games show up in Age of Sigmar. But then you have that extra added layer of the community. You're with these people, like you said, for an extended period of play. If you're having a bad game, you know, at your LGS, it's a lot easier to walk away from the table than like at a tournament.
Right.
You know? But like,
yep.
So like you have to be cordial to a certain extent in these various environments. But as you meet people, like, why does that guy not thrive in a tournament scene? Quote unquote, like, you know, that guy with the capital T, capital G. Because that guy becomes a known commodity at a tournament and gets his chops busted by the greater weight of everybody at the community who is there for the camaraderie, to win or show off their sweet models or whatever their other other agendas may be. But, like, that guys who just wants to, like, win and be kind of a shitlord doesn't really thrive in that environment because you're singled out, you know. Hashtag.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
100%. And I'm sorry, Necrolepsy, for pronouncing your name wrong.
It's like that guy herd immunity, you know, like there's like tournaments have like herd immunity from that guys.
Sure. It's a great way to put it. You're absolutely right. Warhammer Fantasy 4th edition. If you mean Fantasy Battles, I started playing in 4th edition. If you mean the role-playing game, no. I played one version of the role-playing game, which was, I don't remember, it was way back. Whatever was available circa probably 2000, 2001, something like that.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I liked a lot of the lore of the old world, but it wasn't a game that really appealed to me for playing and role-playing in that world because it was just kind of fantasy with like just a slight filter turn, like a desaturated filter on it, like
it was fantasy shot by Zack Snyder.
Yeah, like it. I'm like, yeah, that's cool and stuff. And I love the story of Vlad and you know, I love Nagash's origin stories, and I love some of these stories from some of these characters.
I love watching the Skaven kill Nagash over and over again.
I mean, they got to have they got to give their setting plot armor in the form of the rat.
I heard you say that, but like that's a wonderful meta explanation. But the other answer could just be that Nagash isn't very good.
No, Nagash is fantastic. You should be thanking him for 2nd edition existing. Everyone walks in the garden of his turbulence right now, including his realm, especially because he's inverted it. Like he is, he's the bad guy we can all love. Whether it's you love to hate him because that means he's doing something right if you hate him as the bad guy, or you identify with him and you love him because he's the thinking man who is plagued by his humanity. He has these long-reaching schemes. Death is meaningless to him, so it never factors into his plots that like he could die because he just doesn't even. Death isn't a consequence for this man. So like they do I think that arrogance because like, oh yeah, I could die, whatever. Like it just never comes into his equations for his plans because it's just this. And I think that shows in all of these plots where, like, he loses the stupid-ass fucking Ratman because he just didn't... It's like the, I don't know if you watch any stand-up comedy or anything. It's like the Dave Chappelle bit where, like, they get pulled over and his friend gets out of a speeding ticket because he looks at the officer and he's like, I'm sorry, I didn't know I couldn't do that. Like, that's Nagash. It's like I'm sorry, I didn't know I could die. Like, it doesn't occur to him. And so he's kind of undermined by his own, like he has this, like he's looking so far into the future that he doesn't see the short term, and I think there's an elegance in that. I love that his humanity, despite being an immortal death god who has consumed all the other death gods across the mortal realms to become like Death God Prime, he still makes these like shitty human mistakes. And I love that. I love it. And at least he's not a fucking coward. And that is the worst character defect, is to be a fucking coward, which is what Sigmar is.
I disagree on that. But okay. That's fine. I don't...
The first sentence of the Slaves to Darkness tome had me on board immediately. Sigmar is a false god. Yeah. I'm just like, whoo! Like, it's so... Like, I love that the tomes all read like propaganda, and if you already dislike Sigmar, you're just gonna be like, yes, double stamped, signed on board with this book. Like, it had me at hello, and because I hate Sigmar. I've hated Sigmar since the Empire. I'm like, oh, look at this, like, little Mary Sue human. Humans are the best in a world with fucking dragons. Fuck that. I'm so mad at that. Like I just... That's where, like, my hatred begins, is as, like, in the 6th grade, like, 22 years ago, like, Empire, oh yeah, Empire, like, just dudes, and they fight with crazy, coked-out rat men, like, actual elves riding goddamn dragons, and, like, all this really cool shit, and you're like, oh, but they have the power of human positivity, and that's how they win. I'm like, why do we do that in fantasy? You have awesome stuff, like dragons, and elves, and magic, and you're trying to tell me that just, like, some regular human... I'm a regular human! In reality, and it sucks. So, like, why would I think that we'd be any more awesome in fantasy?
Oh, because people seem to empathize and want more human stories. But look. First of all, this Sigmar bashing that's going on is one of just the worst emblematic problems of our age.
This is the worst one.
What I'm saying is it's emblematic of all the problems with these damn kids today. Is basically I'm gonna be the old man yelling at Cloud. That is the luxury. To hold such a position is the luxury of one who's never had to make a hard decision in your life. That's what that is. Because otherwise, yes, I'm sure that most people consider, Great Britain in the 40s cowards because they had to hide on the island for a little while and get bombed before they invaded mainland Europe. No doubt they were nothing but cowards for not immediately just launching all of their forces headlong into an army they had no chance against. You're right. That's cowardice. I mean, it's utter nonsense. It's utter propagandic nonsense. No, he's the good guy who preserves civilization and life. And as much as we all joke about it, get out of here. Get out of here. Is he a perfect character? No, of course not. That's what makes him an interesting sort of being, right?
Right.
Because of course flawed protagonists are more interesting than perfected protagonists most of the time.
I'm not sure if I'm supposed to stick with my bravado or actually argue intellectually with you right now.
I've pivoted on you.
Now that you're saying real concepts that I agree with in narrative, I'm like, yeah, that's right. But Sigmar but Sigmar still sucks, you see?
No, I get it. Look, I mean, it doesn't matter.
Archaon has more in common with Winston Churchill than Sigmar has with Winston Churchill.
I mean, that's probably true, I guess. I don't know. Ultimately, it doesn't matter because you're all just fodder for Slaanesh, so it's irrelevant because all of this is just excesses.
Right.
Nagash is excess of pride, and the humans excess of fear and bravado themselves, and on and on and on. That's why every other thing makes Slaanesh stronger. So it doesn't really matter. You all lose in the end and come join the Dark Princess. So it's fine. The long game has already been decided. It's an irrelevant fight. No, it's time to count down now.
So we're on since we're on the topic. You have to know that the moral relativity thing. We were talking about what was it? It was with Doug and I were talking about how if you haven't watched the episode with Doug from 2 Plus Tough on RantCast, you're missing out. That was a blast.
It was a good episode.
We talked about how Sigmar is actually the bad guy, and we were making all these
all these Magnus did nothing wrong arguments. Yes.
Yeah. But the thing is Sigmar. It's very important that people realize that good is mostly good and bad is mostly bad in narrative, especially because you're able to draw those lines as such. And Sigmar isn't killing all humans and taking their literal souls and stuff like that. These genuinely agreed upon bad things.
Right. Yes. Exactly.
And so whilst it is my hot take persona to say Nagash is the ultimate good guy because Chaos can't win if he takes all the souls for himself, because then those souls don't go to Chaos. Right. If everything's a dead automaton, then Chaos can't exist in the mortal realms. It needs human emotions to prey upon, essentially, or elven emotion, because elves are always cranked up to 10 in terms of their feelings, which is why they have to be Spocks. They have to they have to train themselves to not have the big swings of an emotion because they know that they fuel the chaos gods more than others. So that stuff. So again, one
of my favorite little short stories. Speaking of Slaanesh and Nagash, one of my favorite little short stories in the lead up to the Necroquake and to everything with that was there was a story where it was from the POV of Slaanesh in the prison or whatever, where Slaanesh kind of looked forward and saw a world of everything being dead, right?
Hell yeah.
and how utterly boring and awful it would be because nothing would have any emotion. There was just this lack of anything that Slaanesh loves, right?
Mhm.
And then when Slaanesh looked deeper, he saw the excess, the pride, all of this singular force in the realm of death,
Mhm.
and was like, oh, never mind, everything will be. And there was like, because for a moment, Slaanesh was like slightly afraid of what she saw there, right? Because there was this emptiness to the potential future, right?
Uh-huh.
But then she saw the overwhelming, astronomical, excessive pride of this one being, and was like, never mind, everything's fine.
See, that just makes
And
him even
like,
cooler.
the story ended with her like smiling and being just like drinking that in. Yeah, that's the good stuff right there.
Yeah.
Like that's excess on a super level.
So he's the high end cognac. He's the like Nagash's pride is like the top shelf whiskey.
Yes, that does seem to be the case. Yeah,
That
I
just
agree
makes
with
him even cooler. Like I don't even like you're saying like so, you know how like sometimes you can have the same like you have the exact same take as somebody else, but then one person says it excited and the other person says it like it's a bad thing.
Of course. Yeah.
Like you just said something that makes Nagash more awesome to me. Like he has so much ego that he could sustain Slaanesh by himself. Like if the whole world is dead and Nagash wins in the end. That's freaking fantastic. That's
a lot of ego. Yeah, so I like the whole. The point is, I do like all the characters they've created and that we play with here on this stage. Like it is fun that we have these personalities that I think are interesting and we can tell cool stories with, be it Sigmar or Archeon or these kind of people. And I as you have said before, quoting, I don't remember who it was that had the original quote, but like that AOS is fantasy's fantasy, right?
Yeah.
And I would just say, as I sort of defined it in a video a long time ago, that AOS it's epic fantasy, it's mythic fantasy.
Yeah,
right?
we're on that higher scale.
Yeah, it's it's the stories of Greek gods, right? Those didn't really feature a lot of normal humans unless they were ending up in a real bad way. Like it wasn't a great thing to be a normal human in a story featuring Greek gods, right? That didn't generally end well for you.
Right.
And such it is here as well. And I like that. You can still tell very human stories. One of the things, just to go back to sort of a world like Rifts real quick, not that I want to restart that discussion. We're good, but at the same time, one of the coolest things about Rifts is you can tell an intergalactic, interdimensional war, right? And that can be your story this week or this game or whatever. And the next game, you can have the entire thing be a Magnificent Seven set in a town in the New West with just like 7, gunslingers and nobody's trying to defend against an army from the Picos Empire, and you never leave that one town.
Yeah.
And you can zoom way down to the most human. It's the same in the Mortal Realms, right? You can have these earth-shattering necroquake gods bashing against each other's stories, but you can also just have like Callus and Toll or something.
Well, and I think that you also kind of mentioned Warcry before. That's where Warcry really comes into this really nicely, because you have when you play your big army, you're zoomed out. You're the finger in an RTS. You just zoom all around the board. You have omni-sight. Like when you play Warcry, you're zooming back down to those personal stories, and I think that's just a good thing. And they've created a world that facilitates that. One of the reasons, I'm not harshing on 40K here, but I got to bring it up. One of the things that like there's sort of a defeatist feeling to all of 40K when you zoom in on on individual characters. You're like, oh, everything's fucked anyway. Still, but you can like the walls are just closing in. They had that plot not advance for so long, because if they advanced it, just all of mankind is wiped out, and in the end they had to literally Deus Ex Machina save mankind, so that like they could progress the narrative, like by waking up time.
I agree. It's one of the things that just has never been. That's always honestly kind of turned me off about 40K, because yes, I suppose on one hand you can do that same level of plots I'm talking about, but on the other hand it's so dour and just like everything about the world is just awful all the time. It's just relentless,
Yes.
relentless depression, right? That I'm like, man, this whole world needs, some Prozac or something. Like, it's not fun. Like, the Mortal Realms, for whatever, are often still fun and goofy. Yeah, sometimes it's all deadly serious and blah, 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 and that's cool. But, like, there's plenty of stuff in the Mortal Realms that's just wacky, wacky fun, right?
Gorka Morka's story, where he just goes, where, like, they assemble the initial pantheon, like the goddamn Power Rangers, and, like, okay, Nagash, and he's just, like, literally, like, like, evil laughing in the corner with his, putting, like, wrapping his fingers together, and, like, Gorka Morka is just like, what do you need me to do? He's like, I want you to go around and just punch all the god beasts in the mouth, and he's like, on it. Like, it's just, like, clear out, you're the snowplow, you're just gonna clear out you're the bulldozer, you're gonna clear all the space out so we can start building some civilizations, because right now, god beasts just roam around. It's just a world of Godzillas. Just Godzillas everywhere forever, and they're just going to destroy any city we build instantly, so Gorka Morka, why don't you go out and just smash shit? And, like, it still has that humor. And 40K has a humor, too, but it's, like, it's it has to go so far into the dark hyperbole where you get, like, Cultist Chan, and you get some of these other wacky, like, the Inquisition jokes and stuff like that. But, like, there's a quintessential silliness to a lot of the AOS stuff still.
Out of character with it. So, like, I actually like that new webcomic they started doing in 40K, the, like, Brothers or whatever, where it's, like, a bunch of different Space Marines from the different chapters who, like, rescue a little girl and have to take care of her, and they're, like, teaching her about what it's like to be a Space Marine. I don't know if you've read this one at all.
I haven't read this, no.
It's really fun and good. Like, I like it. Like, there's a guy in there who's real good at hiding, and the way he hides is he literally just walks around with a box on top of him. Like, like, wasn't it Solid Snake who was always moving around?
Yeah, Snake's got the box, yeah.
Yeah, so it's a joke on that, right? And it's just really funny because they play it for laughs and yucks and all that. And it's great. It's a fun series. It's interesting to watch them interact with something they wouldn't normally do in this very human way with the kid. But it doesn't feel like it's actually happening in the universe.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
It doesn't feel like that's actually part of the setting. It feels like, oh, that's a fun side joke, right?
It's the what if stories that Marvel used to do, where you're like, this isn't canon. This is so clearly not part of their world. This is just somebody had a nerd conversation with their friend and wrote a story about what if this happened, right?
Look, I mean, you don't have to sell me on What If. What If is one of my favorite comics ever. When they introduced the What If series, they showed 3 covers, that's coming to Disney Plus or whatever, and they showed 3 covers of What Ifs, and one of them was literally my favorite What If of all time, because it's what if Doctor Doom had become a hero. It's the one where the only change in the story was Doctor Doom had one small moment of humility, where when Reed Richards told him that his calculations were wrong in college, he actually took a half second and believed him and went and double checked his calculations and realized that he had made a small mistake, and then ended up fixing it, saving his mom, becoming a hero, and everything goes horribly wrong, and it's wonderful. It is one of the greatest stories because, like, I carried a picture of Doctor Doom in my wallet in front of my wife for years, when I still carry pictures in my wallet. It went Doctor Doom, turn it, my wife.
He's one of the Marvel greats, by the way. Like, greatest villains is like Magneto and Doctor Doom are like right on the precipice at the very, very top for me. And I lean a little bit towards Magneto because the racial implications and growing up in a biracial family, so I just identified with that story a little bit more. But Doctor Doom as the flawed genius, like cold calculating machine is, I mean, he's very Nagashian, and I respect that.
Oh yeah, man. If you ever want to see like the most awesome panel with Doctor Doom ever, for those of you who might not be initiated, just search up, like, go into Google and image search.
I think I know which one you're gonna say.
And the Purple Man, okay? Because we all know Purple Man because we watched Jessica Jones.
It's very good, yeah. David Tennant as a villain is best David Tennant.
It was fantastic. It was great, and you see how the Purple Man can just tell anyone to do anything he wants, and they will do it, right? Mm-hmm. And there's this wonderful series of panels. Dr. Doom had captured the Purple Man and was trying to figure out how he worked. So he had him in like a big test tube, and he had all these scientists around who were basically performing experiments on the Purple Man to figure out like what was giving him these powers, right? And the Purple Man's yelling at Doctor Doom. And he's like, "You're nothing. You're no one. You have all these lackeys. I'm so much stronger than you." He's like, you would do anything I said if you let me out of this tube you're keeping me in, right? You're nothing. Okay, you rely on these toys and these people you hide behind. And Doctor Doom says, "All right, everybody leave." And so immediately, all like 100 people who are in the room walk out, right? And he walks up to the tube. He takes off his helmet and his armor, so it's just him exposed, right? And he opens the door and he leans in like this far from the Purple Man's face. And the Purple Man starts yelling at him. And the closer you get to him, the harder it is to resist his demands, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the Purple Man starts saying, "Kill yourself, go do these things, bow down, unchain me." And Doom just stares at him and doesn't move at all. And he yells until he's blue in the face and he can't yell anymore. And then Doom just looks at him and smiles and then puts his mask back on and puts his armor back on and says, "Now," whatever, I don't remember the Purple Man's real name, but he says, "Now," he uses his real name. And he says, "Now, Purple Man, who is it that should rule exactly?" And then just turns around and walks out because his will was strong enough that you cannot break. Even this guy with a supernatural power to bend people's minds couldn't break Doom's will. Like, that is why I love that character, right? That is the story right there.
See, there's I thought you were gonna go with the other panel. I think it's like Galactus or something's about to like destroy the Earth, and Doom like just fucking shows up and Doom blasts him, and he's like, and then like a side character is like, "Why are you helping us?" And he's like, "Because this guy's trying to destroy the world, and I'm trying to rule it."
It's the opening panel of the Infinity War, is what you're referencing.
Yeah,
the opening panel of the Infinity War. Silver Surfer crashes into for everybody who saw the movie, the way Banner comes down and crashes into the Sanctum Sanctorum. Silver Surfer in the original comic is who crashes into the Sanctum Sanctorum, and it's like Thanos gauntlet coming, right? Mm-hmm. And Doom walks in to the Sanctum Sanctorum, just walks in. Never mind that it's a magically protected fortress. He had just got in there because he's the second most powerful sorcerer in addition to being everything else. And Silver Surfer's like, "Doom, you're a villain," and goes to shoot him, and Doom just literally blasts him and sits him down and is like, "You, sit down, shut up. Silver Surfer, now, Strange, we have to talk." Right? Like, that's the panel you're referencing.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
I would have also accepted the thing that I actually carried. The reason I carried that card is because it was one of the Marvel cards. And on the back, it had a quote from him in the Secret Wars when the Beyonder is literally pulling him apart. Mm-hmm. Like, literally pulling his body apart. And he says, he's taken off my arm, my leg, half my torso, but it doesn't matter. It's just pain. Pain is a thing for lesser men, like love. What is pain to Doom? Right? And that is just like, Jesus God. Yeah. That's a quote.
Yeah. Doom's great. He's so awesome. Yeah. And that's the bad guy you could get behind. And he kind of goes the opposite direction with it, where his plight is shutting off his humanity,
Right.
Man, I think you just successfully won an argument. I now like Dr. Doom better than Magneto. It has taken 34 years, but congratulations.
Doom's a great character.
He's a great character.
Fascinating and wonderful and flawed and awesome all at the same time. Don't get me wrong, I completely understand Magneto. I mean, he was over the Claremont run when he was eventually running the school. That was just such a beautiful arc. Like, there's no doubt about it. Because Claremont's the one who introduced the Auschwitz background and everything else, right? I mean, it was just, It was really great. So I have no issue with you saying that. Hello, dear.
Yeah. Magneto did his backstory. I like the counterplay. I guess the thing that makes like Magneto so great is that he plays really well in the plot as an extension of the plot, whereas Doom is very much like. I mean, Magneto is very much Magneto, but Doom is very much like always himself in. Yeah. Like, whereas the best of Magneto is when he is playing off of something in the plot. I actually like Morose goes away from society Magneto a great deal, where he just he goes away and he's like, "Fucking leave me alone."
Sure. Well, I mean, here's one thing we can say. As far as all movies go, where there's been portrayals of these guys, Magneto has come out way in advance of any portrayal of Doom on screen. Like, I mean, Magneto has been portrayed by two of the greatest actors in cinema, period, right?
Yeah.
To both older and younger Magneto, and they've both been amazing.
Well, to quote Magneto, perfection. Like, yeah. Well, the other thing I always liked about Magneto is he has like a power that is kind of shitty on its face, but the initial run and how they've built it is his power is a very limited thing, but he has such a mastery over it, that one power, magnetism, that he is this world class category 4 villain or whatever. Like he's a category, like the power, like Professor X's power, obviously awesome on its face.
Sure.
You know, like, and Magneto is like, oh yeah, I could fucking manipulate magnetic poles and shit like that. It was just that, or not even magnetic poles, like just my own magnetic field, my personal magnetic field, and then like it, you know, every writer adds something to the canon, obviously, but it's like at its core, it's like I can manipulate magnets. I have fucking magnet power. You know, there's a terrible band out there that raps about magnets. What the fuck or how the fuck do those work? Like he's just magnets, and like he goes so far in his like his drive to like to take equality by force for mutant, the new race, the best race, right? Like, and the whole kind of his backstory, the Claremont backstory, like the Auschwitz backstory, like how he kind of becomes a reflection of his own hatred over time. Like it's just fucking awesome. Mm-hmm. So I like that.
Redemption, right? I mean, that was, you know, have you watched the Chris Claremont documentary?
No.
It's really good. I'd highly recommend it. It's not super long. It's maybe like 30 minutes. But it reflects on Claremont's entire run in his career. You know, picking up with the X-Men in 75 and running through to 1992, which is just an unprecedented run. Because he wasn't just writing X-Men, he wrote a bunch of stuff.
Wolverine as well, which is like he ran Wolverine when Wolverine became my favorite character. So
yep. And so, you know, he's singularly talented, amazing writer.
He is directly responsible for Captain Marvel being good and not terrible, because there was a huge, like, her backstory was very poorly written by a bunch of, I don't want to go into it, but they fumbled her backstory, and he fixed her. Like, he made her, like, the reason Captain Marvel's around at all now is because of him, pretty much directly.
Yeah, so like all of that, so it's a great documentary, but he talks about how when he started writing Magneto, who was obviously the villain, right? He'd been introduced quite a bit before that. He knew by the time he reached issue 300, which was, you know, like 7 or 8 years away from where he was, he wanted him in charge of the school and to be a redeemed villain, right? Like that's an unbelievable arc to be writing and going, monthly, 8 years from now, I know where I want this character to go.
Yeah.
Right. And he worked with great editors too, who enabled him. So you know, he was great, but he also had, you know, really great editorial support there for a long time. So it's a worthwhile documentary. Check it out.
I will. No, absolutely. I'll add it to the list, and it'll go all the way up the top of the list. Love documentaries. I obviously love comics. I think that's part of my personality that doesn't. Obviously, now that I'm doing RantCast, it's come to the surface that I love comic books as much as I do, but I don't feel like I get often the opportunity to really display how much I love comics as a format. And I mean, you have, I think they're like in an essence, they're very much like how you would write a comic book would be how I would write like an RPG session weekly, you know?
Yeah, sure.
That structure very much. You talked earlier about how, you know, writing a movie versus writing a TV show, and I default to comics when I think in that term.
I think that's a very fair comparison. Like I absolutely understand where you're going there, and I don't disagree. I mean, I think that's probably a fair thing to think about it, because you do want that kind of almost high drama often in your RPG.
Little hyperbole, right? Like hyperbole goes a really long way in tabletop RPGs, because you're already in the theater of the mind's eye, and it's very easy to get people to see the big dynamic thing inside their head, and not always, and the nuance and the subtlety comes through in the social aspect when you're talking to people. And so I think you have that balance.
Well, that's sort of that scale and that huge nature of what comics can often do is, and perhaps this is an interesting segue from sort of that to there. You mentioned that the theater of the mind's eye or whatever. It's one of the reasons I never use miniatures in my role
Wow.
playing. I despise miniatures in role playing.
I think they take
Not
away.
just
Go ahead.
not
Yeah,
just
yeah.
yeah, not just don't like them, actively despise them. Feel they make the game actively worse. Okay. When you have, because in my estimation, role playing is a theater of the mind's eye exercise,
Mhm.
and it's in the tin. It's called role playing, not combat simulator. Last time I checked, the genre wasn't called combat simulation. Correct me if I'm wrong, and they've changed the label. But since I last looked, it was called role playing. And anything that pulls you away and gives you this meta view and gets you thinking about stuff that's not actually in your imagination can only detract, in my estimation, from the actual experience of playing the game. The second you're counting a square that your character can move, like, well, okay, my character's got 7 squares of movement. If I go here, I can still get him with exactly this spell, but then this other guy will be out of range to heal me and buff me next round. Nope. You're not role playing anymore. You're playing a combat simulator. Congratulations, you've started doing something else. And I really, really, really hate miniatures. I never use them in role playing. Obviously, I love miniatures in wargaming. But like, I just feel it's actually actively deleterious on the effect, or on what we're on about here, and that you're much better served, honestly, by just sticking to your mind's eye. Yes, it means once in a while you will have a little confusion, and you'll need to be reminded, wait, who's where and what's going on, and you know what? That's still totally worth it.
Yeah.
In the end. So that's that. There's my hot takey, my RantCasty worthy hot take.
Yeah. Yeah. There you go. No, I agree with you. I don't see. I stopped using. We use Roll20 to run my games now. I've stopped actually putting tokens on Roll20 to play with now.
Yeah.
It's just the initiative tracker and sometimes like quote unquote establishing shots or establishing images of like,
Sure.
you guys are in a diner, so I'll find an image of a diner or something and I'll
Sure.
put that up.
Which, that kind of stuff I love. Yeah, sure, absolutely. If you can find a picture of the setting to like
It's something that
set
you
up setting. Yeah.
Yep. Because like, you know, so I had like the Silver City the players were in, so I combed through images. It was called like the city of, I think it was called the City of Circles, and it was very much supposed to be this like celestial version of the Malebolgia that was on the plane or on the planet the party was on. So it was this like, you know, there's a backstory why this Silver City is here and stuff like that, or the City of Circles. And so I went through combing through for circular shaped cityscapes and stuff like that, and I found this image that worked really nicely. But the thing is like, I've always, as a writer, I am trying to get you to see something the way I see it in my head, whilst also making a concession that the way you see it is probably the best way for you. Like,
right.
Your, like, the thing in your brain, like, I want you to see a particular scene, but the specifics are yours, you know?
Yep.
Like, I think that there's a fun balancing act. The reason that so many movies fail is because the visuals of your mind's eye are so difficult to capture perfectly for everybody that goes and watches that movie. When I read a book, even with comic books, like, I see that fucking visceral, awesome image of Wolverine. Yes, exactly. I see like Wolverine shredded up and, you know, he's bleeding in the one image. But then as I move to the next panel, I'm now,
your brain's doing a lot of work there.
Yes. Yeah. And that's why I think comic books hit a nice little medium, and that's why to round this all the way back around, that's why I use comic books as my like template for when I'm running adventures in D&D or Rifts or whatever. I think about those big moments. Yeah. But then from there, absolutely, I let your brain, the player, do the work and edit it in between. So.
Yeah, I mean, there's we mentioned Infinity War earlier, and there's a moment where Cap squares off against Thanos.
Oh,
in that,
so good.
It's amazing, and like, that's only really a few panels, and not much actually happens movement-wise. But all of that is indelibly imprinted in my brain from the first time when I read that when I was younger. Like, because that's just it. It's not what actually was in the comic is what's in my brain. What's in my brain is indelibly imprinted. You know what I'm saying? Like, I saw the whole scene, and that locked in. Yeah?
Yeah, well, no, it's the negative space essentially, like of
Yes.
the. I went back and I was reading it because I got my huge hardcover of the Infinity Wars, and I was reading it for the second time, or second time is who knows, like 100th
I
time,
know.
but
Yeah,
a second time now that I'm older, I swore the scene was longer. I
right. It's
swore.
so short.
I
It's so short.
I had edited stuff into my memory that
Right.
wasn't part of it. Where like I imagined the broken shield and all these like other it's like 3 panels. And the big thing is like I had imagined his speech being more grandiose about how like I'm just a man, but I'm going to stand up to you because it's what's right even though you're this godly being. And like it's like one blurb and my brain had just edited in all this extra stuff from when I was a kid, admiring the scene, to now that I'm an adult, and like I mean there's a beauty in what's not said in in narrative, and I think this goes. You can bring this back to wargaming is what we were talking about with putting it on the war scroll and stuff like that. When you say these sixes explode for this reason, and you give somebody a sentence rather than a keyword, their brain starts to do a lot of work.
Yep. Well, at a deeper level, even in the wargaming narrative, this is one of the reasons I don't want all the, like, people are always like, why can't we get a map of all the mortal realms, or why can't we get this, or what's going on here? And the answer is, you tell me, right? Like, why do you need the agency of some author to tell you that? Like, this is your world as much as it is theirs. And uh, like, the worst thing that can happen is they fill in all of the blanks, right? I think of Pirates of the Caribbean 3 or whatever, when the head of when you meet to the head of like the East India Tea Company, right?
Yeah.
And he's like, the map is getting filled in, Jack. There are no more monsters, right? Like that sort of statement that he gets of like, the world is known, is what he's saying, right? And we have ships everywhere. We control all of it. We know this. It's all reachable by me. And there's nowhere you can sail. I can't find you. There's no off the map anymore.
Yeah.
And that to me is the death of interest in a kind of world like this, in an imaginative, speculative fiction world like this, because what's beautiful about the Mortal Realms and about AOS is how little is known.
Yeah.
Right. And like, that doesn't mean I don't want stuff. Of course, I want little insights here and there. I want to see what whatever's happening with Heish whenever we get that in the new year, right? When we get our giant angel elves, undoubtedly, right?
Or 2 armies, giants versus angel elves, eh?
Yeah. Like, whenever we get whatever that is, cool, great. It'll be awesome to get an insight into that. But that's just a sliver of it, right?
Right.
Like, I love that zoom out map they did of Akshi that showed like the burning peninsula where all of the sort of initial wars happened, and how it's like you see it's this massive peninsula where there's just miles and miles and miles of territory, right? And then they zoom out to the region, and then they zoom out to the plane of fire, and you can barely see the peninsula anymore. It's like 2 pixels on this thing. Like, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, they talk about how like the realm of Shyish and Ulgu and all these things are basically planets unto themselves with full like sets of biomes and stuff, which is something that like in sci-fi always, and is especially in games, where like you're playing Mass Effect and you go to the cold planet and it's just like that's its own feature. World. It's just always ice. The whole world, like I'm like, these guys, like there are several biomes on our tiny little planet, and you have these massive other planets in sci-fi, and they're always only defined by one environment. The fuck is going on? They've actually kind of confirmed a little bit that the mortal realms are like, they have like like you might have a desert, and that's a fire desert, and you might have like a fucking mountain, and like you're gonna have all these different regions, and like it can actually be really just a nice day in Akshi, in various places and stuff like that. So I love that they've kind of they're giving you a lot of these sharp edges to kind of grab onto, but then there's so much more space for
you to fill in the blanks.
Yes. Yeah, for your mind to edit between the panels of the comic book, for your brain to do that extra work, and I really enjoy that. It's it's not like everything is a fixed point in space. I had that similar moment where you talked about zooming out. I lost my mind when they're like, "Oh yeah, here's the Ossian Empire. This is all we've shown you of Shyish so far. Here's a whole freaking country right next to it." Just like, oh, whoa, mind blown. Like having those little moments where you're on the journey with them. I mean, it reminds me a lot of how I consumed Warhammer initially, where I would just read the little stories in everyone's, various army book, or, they weren't battle tomes back then, codex, I suppose, going and just like jumping around through the narrative. And the longer that existed, the more the map filled in. I mean, they show you the entirety of the world that was. Here's a picture. It looks roughly like our real and actual world.
Weird.
Yeah, weird. How fantasy authors really love to do that shit.
Just knock off Earth and make it like not Earth. Yes. That's great. That's real creative. No, that's definitely the first time I've seen that.
See, Jack Vance, I thought, did it the best with the Dying Earth. Have you read
Dying Earth?
Yeah, the Dying Earth. I thought that was fantastic because that was the reveal down the line, right? Like we were like, "Holy shit, it's in the future, and now it's fantasy." Like,
did you ever read Gene Wolfe's Book of the New Sun?
No.
Quadrilogy, trilogy, whatever it is.
No.
If you like that sort of thing, I would highly recommend it. I will warn you, it is the most dense book ever. So like, you've got to get your vernacular test ready. It's like an SAT level vocabulary test just to read the book. Okay, not that I'm doubting your vocabulary in any way. I know you're a very experienced reader/writer, but like, it is a writer's book. If you like that sort of thing, I know
so like Salman Rushdie.
Yes, it's amazing. It's really, really wonderful. Couldn't recommend it enough. Like, and again, it's it's called the Book of the New Sun because it's happening so far in the future that the sun has gone red. Okay.
Awesome.
Like our sun. It's on a future Earth where the sun is red. We're that far in the future. And humanity has survived more or less intact for the entirety of it. And it's a fascinating look at that world. So yeah.
I'll have to check it out. I'll have to check it out. No, I'll edit. I keep meaning to read Dune again before we get the series or whatever it is. I keep meaning to, but I'm like, I remember making it through like the books of Dune like once, and we don't count, the kids' books, but like making it through Dune and going, man, I'm never doing that again. That was awesome, but I'm never doing that again. And here I am, I'm like, oh, man, I kind of want to read it again. It's just like with the Infinity Wars stuff. I'm like, I want to read this again because does it hold up? Does my memory hold up? And
yeah, I mean, my answer is the first book of Dune is worth reading, and then you can kind of stop there. Like the first one's pretty good, and then and then the rest are just like their books.
Yeah,
they are in fact books,
and I mean, in a book that is already bogged down with the minutia of its own world building, they get really mired in it as that series goes on. So. Oh
sure, I mean, look, I have watched the movie, like the long cut of it and the Lynch cut of it. I own a bunch of them. I own everything on every version that's ever been released. Like, I am a massive Dune fan. Okay, and I have watched all of that many times, including the alternate beginnings and alternate endings and the extra scenes and the whole deal so many times. Like, I could just start doing the movie right now and get all the way through the whole thing and switch characters. Like, I mean, I know all that. But I'm super excited for the new one for Villeneuve's Dune next year for sure.
Same. Luke, I would posit that it was a terrible read as a child. But like, same thing with Dragonlance. Like, I loved my Dragonlance books, and again, I liked Raistlin in that because I have a thing for evil wizards, it turns out.
And then you go back and read it, and you're like, oh, boy,
I was basically reading like romance novel level of fiction, and just like really loving it more than I should have as a kid, because I mean, your brain is wonderful at filling in the blanks and doing extra work in a lot of these things. And I found when I was younger, I read things a lot more optimistically.
Right.
Than like older, and not just for lack of experience and being exposed to like better and better fiction. I mean, I truly believed the best of the stuff I read. You know, like,
right. I will say that series does get better as it goes. Like, boy, that first book though is rough. And if you read the annotated chronicles, you know why. It's because they were writing it as they were playing it, and like weren't really sure. That's why the first one just literally feels like a written D&D adventure, because it is.
Right.
And then they wrote ahead of it and got better. And then like
the twin stuff is good.
better.
The twin stuff is really good. Yeah, the twin stuff is really good. And like nothing against Weiss and Hickman. They ushered in an era for me. Like
singularly talented people. No, nothing against them. They're two of the great fantasy authors that, along with like Terry Brooks and a few others, really invented the modern age of like fantasy fiction. So
right.
I let's not disparage them in any great way.
I really have to the parts where my humor and my true beliefs land. Like sometimes I have to circle back and let you know I would never shit talk Hickman or Weiss. They're
amazing. And what's funny is like that's why I like the annotated chronicles, because like Jeff Grubb is in there a bunch too, because he was part of their group and he was very involved in the creation of the initial novels and everything. And he's obviously huge and important in the history of D&D and stuff. And even when you read the annotated chronicles, he'll be like, you'll see him interject sometimes and he'll be like, wow, this first book is really rough. Like, I think he's got an honest beat on it, like anybody who looks at their own work.
I can't listen to my first 10 episodes of RantCast anymore. Like I trying to run self-diagnostics to like get better and better. Like I'm like, ugh, like these are a chore. And reading and writing some of the books I've written, I've gone back. There's like one story that's held up of every story I have written in the last 2 years. If I just focus it in 2 years, every story I've written the last 2. There is one I like upon reflecting on it and reading it back to myself. The vast majority. The thing is like every time you do something, you get better at doing it. The painting. You're a huge like advocate for just. You're basically the guy. I thought we'd talk a lot more about it today, honestly. Well,
you never know where RantCast is going to go.
That's right. I don't. The meme is that I make fun of Harry Potter and I hate Harry Potter. I don't hate Harry Potter. It's just not. It wasn't. I had already read Dragonlance. I had already read Dragonlance and all that stuff when I was younger, and that was my fantasy growing up. I think a lot of people start with The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings, just like I did, and then I'm like, well, what's next? Dragonlance, cool, awesome. And from there, I had already moved on in interest. I started reading, Once and Future King, speaking of like a just dry as shit book I'd never read again. Like, like I'd already moved on, and so by the time Harry Potter came out, I was just like too old, and so I never got into it. But I do remember seeing Hermione spelled out and going, "What the fuck?" like, how the fuck does that become Hermione? And just like my brain short-circuiting, because like I will admit, I have only seen the movies and I have only read the first Harry Potter book. So I've watched all my Harry Potter knowledge comes from shit people tell me when I make fun of Harry Potter and the movies, and then one book going, oof, this is rough.
Yeah, that first one wasn't great.
I'm sure it's an actual, but that's the thing is like I can't commit. I can go back and read Roald Dahl, by the way. Matilda is fantastic.
I appreciate that, but I really can't. I find his writing is just
really?
See,
like Matilda, for its like I was reading Matilda because I'm trying to get my kids to read some of the stuff I read because I'm just indoctrinating my children to be my minions. So I was like reading Matilda with my son. I'm like, yeah, I can get behind this still. Like I trying to work my way up to reading the Harry Potter books for them, but I'm like, I've only owned the one, and I'm like, ugh, it was a chore for me to get through personally.
Sure.
Doing a chapter of this a night, I don't know, man. Oh, man.
All right, so what do we want? Do you want to do a little ASF, ASL talk? You want to switch gears rapidly?
We could rapidly switch gears. We were on the hobby platform. I think if anybody just
just
to finish some hobby, just to finish off a hobby thing here.
Lead the way, my friend. I'm following you.
Necrolepsy. Oh, that's weird. Me leading Vince Venturella through hobby. It is I talk about the spheres of Sigmar. It is my weakest sphere. I am the worst. Like, I am just the worst at hobby. It's a journey though, right? And I'm just getting my confidence back in my journey. And
Right.
you've been a huge part of that. Honestly, I think everybody's like encouraging hobby dad. like what does hobby dad have to say? And just like throws you a high five. Get back out there, sport. Like Vince Venturella.
Yeah, sure. Because I mean, part of that comes from the fact that I'm not a good artist in any way, and I don't consider myself one. Like, I don't have any innate artistic talents. My paint jobs from years ago all look like utter trash. My paint jobs from quite recently often always look bad to my eye.
Mm-hmm.
And I just don't have, I didn't show up with artistic training or some great, internalized knowledge of like, this is how art should work and feel. I just sort of powered my way through like anybody, right? And then if I've gotten to where I've gotten, it's just because I've practiced a lot and painted a lot and always been trying new things and experimenting and pushing myself to take the next step. Like there's nothing more to it than that, right? I don't. So if I can do it, me who I know for a fact has no innate artistic skill, like of all the things I'm sure of, it's that one. Okay, so if I can pull it off, anybody can do it. You can all do it. 100%.
Well, this is the quote here in chat. The practice with purpose. Necrolepsy says, "This is true of so many things in life. I think when you're on your hobby journey, this is part of my rewiring my brain this year because I just had a bad mental breakdown at the beginning of the year and I just needed to. I'm like, what's the expression? If nothing changes, nothing changes. I had to change stuff so that things could change, right? And part of it, this practice with a purpose, setting a goal and knowing why. It's the same message throughout a lot of different things that while painting and giving yourself some painting time and painting with a purpose and painting fearlessly, you could just switch the word painting to basically anything in your life. So I don't, you know what? Yeah, line in the sand. I'm going to say that the hobby can improve your life because you're teaching your brain just good stuff for reality. Like you're just...
Oh, I 100% agree with that. Yes, absolutely. Unquestioningly, completely agree. Like the nature of deliberate practice and of intentionally trying to improve what you're doing and in this very deliberate way, where you're not just sitting there redoing the same thing over and over and over again, right? Where you're saying, today I'm going to try to do this thing, or I'm going to try to achieve this thing, or whatever, right? And training your brain to work in that way. Not only is there a huge like positive mental side effect to doing this hobby, to creating, to being artistic. Like there's a reason there's art therapy, there's a reason for all that stuff because it is, and I agree with what Andrew said, with in the chat, where your hands are connected to your brain and this magical thing happens when you practice your hands. Like I agree. Some people do carpentry, some people do canvas painting, some people do blah 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 blah. There's 100 different outlets for it. For us, it happens to be miniature painting, but it's truly this magical thing, right? Mm-hmm. Where you can, not only does it just sort of relieve your stress, but it gives you a focus. It lets you be creative. It lets you make something you can be proud of. It lets you see real results. And if you want to improve, it's completely under your power to do so, right?
Yeah.
Even if you have, physical challenges, if your eyes aren't as good, there are ways to compensate for that. If your hands are shaky, there's ways to compensate for that, right? So like, and by the way, not everybody's end road needs to be like, I'm winning
Golden Demon or whatever. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. That's not what it's about. You don't need to try to be aiming for that. It's just about making something you're proud of and feeling like you can bring your vision to life. And any steps you're taking that do that are good ones, right?
Yeah. And yeah, it's just, I mean, Yeah, I can't say it any better. I think we can talk about ASL now.
Yeah, right on. All right, so what do you want to talk about? So it needs to be fixed. Always strike first, always strike last. The stacking of abilities, this thing I went through. I posted these 4 images.
I've got one of them up right now. Yeah.
Yes, I can see it. I decided that after the show on Thursday, it was time for me to do what I do best in my professional life, which is make a PowerPoint presentation. So I got in and made a PowerPoint presentation, then saved it to 4 images and shared it. And it was important to me to get it into sort of like 4 images because that's what you can share on Twitter. And I wanted it to be 1 tweet, right?
Right.
And this last slide where you see these strange interactions, right? This example of like the Albagar Ancient, where his ability will just literally do nothing in many cases. Like just, it will be non-interactive with the game, right? Because if you fight something like Hermdar, where they can activate and always strikes first, they either swing before you, your ability fires, if it's your turn, or sorry, if it's their turn, or you apply your ability and then they just stack over top of it and get out. And just, they Colossus out of it, right?
Right.
And so it's a completely, you could just replace the text of that with like the ipsum lorem text, and it would have just as much impact on the game.
Yeah.
Right? If that's happening, we've gotten into a weird place. And by the way, the discussions that have happened from this tweet of like people still saying, well, wait, so does this work like this? And I'm like, no. And I have to re-explain it like 4 times. And that's not a judgment, by the way. I in no way impugn anybody for asking for those re-clarifications because it's just too complicated.
I'm very good at the rules. I have had to replay the interactions in my own head. My brain is wired for rules too, and even I'm like having to go, wait a second. Because I find myself reasoning myself out of a position going, because you go like, this is how it should work, right? Like we have that, this is how it should work. Yeah. And then you're trying to like reason yourself to a spot where it works that way, and then you double check and read it, and you're like, narrator, that is not how it works. And one of the things I immediately thought before I began to read into these strange interactions was first in, last out. The thing in Magic the Gathering. That's why I ultimately decided to wear my Nope blue deck shirt today. Because first in, last out is something you just say to a player when you're explaining the stack, right?
Yep. You're standard Philo.
Everyone gets it. Like you say it, and then I still, just like I go, untap, upkeep, untap, upkeep, draw. Like I say it in my brain every single time I play Magic the Gathering. I say first in, last out every time I'm trying to remind myself which ability is going to trigger on the stack in what order.
Well, the annoying part here is it's kind of worse than first in, last out.
And that's where I'm going with that, is you can explain first and last out pretty quick to somebody, and then when they go, well, which ability resolves, you go first and last out, you say that to them, and then they have to run it back, and they go, okay, cool. You go first and last out, unless.
Right.
Now we have a bad rule, or a bad implementation of several, by themselves, pretty awesome rules, because it's fun to play around with turn order and do tricks. Tricks are fun. It's fun to do tricks. As long as we all have tricks, then we're all having fun. That's fine. That's not what I'm arguing about with the activation wars. When it was just one army had them, I was like, But as we got into the year, I said, I'm going to stop judging anything on its face value until it's all out, and then we'll talk about it. Well, now it's all out, and now we need to talk about it.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, because, look, the problem that we've come up against here is that we've backed into this situation.
Yeah.
I would be surprised if the rules writers have really considered the full sweep of this of the impact of what this stuff is doing, right? And that's not a judgment. I'm not trying to be like a negative Nancy. I'm just saying it's really, really crazy complicated, and I hadn't thought of it until this sort of clarification, where it all kind of snapped together in my brain of oh, wait a minute. This has all sorts of weird interactions and exclusions and places where a thing is going to work very differently for completely non-intuitive reasons. And that right there, that's where we get to the problem. None of this works how you think it should. Right? And this is so right away we're violating like one of Rosewater's central tenets, right? Like if you were to just say, this guy is really fast, and so he can swing first, and then he gets hit by something that makes him really slow. When does he actually then attack? The natural thing most people would say is, well, whatever normal is, he's in the middle. Yeah, they cancel each other out. Mm-hmm. Haste and slow from D&D being the classic example, right? Like, you're under a haste effect and you get slowed, you go back to normal. If you're under a slow effect and you get hasted, you go back to normal. It doesn't just overwrite it, right?
Yeah.
And so the it just like it just doesn't track. We can talk about the I'd rather resolve with a
no,
with
he's trolling.
You know what's super negative on this rule? It's my favorite rule in the whole book. But anyway,
the rolling the die? No, I fucking hate it. I think it's the worst rule ever.
Joe bag on this rule for no reason.
No reason.
Correct. We can. Do you want to side turn here?
Yeah, let's go. Why I hate it, and then you can try to convince me, and then you will fail, just like you failed with explaining why Nagash isn't the most awesome badass in the entire world. No, I don't like it because I think it creates. On one hand, I think it creates it incentivizes being murky, and I don't like that.
On whose part?
Anybody's at any given time. Oh man, were you at 10 wounds or 8? I don't remember. We should roll off on it, dude. Like,
okay.
That's
not what it is. Let's read the exact text. Let's start here. Roll.
This is here we go. It has the audacity to present itself as Gary Gygax's Rule 0 without being Gary Gygax's Rule 0. How dare you?
Certainly Rule 0. It's absolutely the Rule 0 of this of wargaming, okay? Because Rule 0 in D&D was empowering the GM, right? To say, you're actually God, you're in charge, do whatever you want all the time. Right? To the end of like, and I've seen several addendums over time to Rule 0 that make it a smarter rule, to the end of like, it has to, in light of being best for your players, all that kind of stuff.
For real quick, in case you're not certain with what Rule 0 is, Rule 0 is in the GM's guide. GM's guide. It wasn't the GM's guide then, right? It was anyway. Gary Gygax wrote a foreword that it is not the letter of the law or spirit of the rule that matters the most. That at your table, run your game the way you want to run it. Right now. That's a heavily paraphrased version of Rule 0. Basically, it is empowering the GM, like Vince just said, to make judgment calls at their table that overwrite or override the rules in the interest of running your game. The reason Rule 0 is so great in the context of D&D and why I think the rule, quote unquote, the Rule 0 or the roll-off rule in AOS is not great is because the GM is equal parts referee and storyteller. In Age of Sigmar, we have kind of a stigma about calling a judge to our table, which would be the equivalent of a referee, and then it says both players are now the referees and it's trying to equally empower them, when being wrong should not be empowered. And that's my ultimate take. Now continue. Sorry.
Okay, you're fine. I don't know where it's even written anymore in the normal.
It's actually like a. Oh boy, my core rules.
I looked in the actual core rules and I don't see it anymore. It's probably in the big book, but anyways.
It's in the big book, yeah. It's pretty much right at the beginning.
Yeah, it's not in the actual rules.
And it pitches itself as the most important rule of Age of Sigmar.
And it basically says, if you can't figure out what the right answer is, right? If you have a rules dispute and you can't figure out what the right answer is, and you and your opponent can't come to an agreement about how to interpret a situation, then roll off. Okay? That is the smartest rule they wrote. Now, at a tournament, you have a judge. Okay? This isn't meant to say this is how you should play tournaments. This is how you play the game.
Okay.
At a tournament, you have this extra layer that comes in, and there is a person there to referee it. Mm-hmm. This is how you create a neutral arbiter when there is no judge. When it's me and a buddy playing in my basement, there's nobody I can call. What am I going to call my wife down and try to explain the situation to her? And
Yes.
if we're at loggerheads, the answer is roll a die.
Yeah.
Okay. And because they're trying to stop you from getting in a fight,
Okay.
which is what's going to happen. Because you're going to sit there and both argue your points forever and just dig in your heels until you get to China. Right?
Mm-hmm.
This is a way of saying, look, this one interaction in the game doesn't matter. You're not here for that. You're here to play the game. So instead of getting stuck on it, and you know, like if you can't, and they specifically say, if you both can't agree.
Right.
It's not like, oh, I bumped my die. I think I had 32 wounds. Oh, 4 up, I'm right. That's not presented in a couple of these things. That's not even close to what it is. Okay? Like that's not even in the same universe. It's a neutral dispute resolution mechanism there for when there is no neutral arbiter.
Mm-hmm.
It's a brilliant rule because what it says is no one rule is worth derailing the game for.
So this point here is actually a very, very important point. Like I can come down for my bravado every now and then to see reason. Every now and then. Nagash will never win. It's very important to note that in a game as robust as Age of Sigmar, even though our brains really want to look to a single instance of I lost the game here, it very so rarely comes down to a single interaction because there are so many interactions across the course of the game. And I think that's a very important point that you're making there that bears repeating, that so very rarely is that like, okay, who strikes first, right? Like, so we've got our flow chart here of the striking first and yada yada yada.
Right.
And we don't have Vince on hand to go through these strange interactions, and we think it should one person thinks it should cancel out, the other one says, well, no, I think my trigger happens, and so now I'm striking first again. And you can't.
We already both went and looked at the rules and couldn't find an answer.
Yeah.
We talked it through and couldn't come to an agreement.
Yeah.
We're out of options.
Right. So you roll the die. That one instance there of that strikes first, whilst you're going to lose a shit ton of models. I don't know how many times I've had an opponent go first, obliterate my board and think it's over, and then I take my turn and now I've obliterated their board, and I'm like, okay, this is really a game still. It's...
Right.
When you reflect on the game as a totality, we talked about practice with purpose. If you were playing with purpose, or what I called during one of my episodes, playing to learn the lesson, like, if you're doing that, it's so very rarely just that one moment that, you know, what was the better lesson there? Getting into a position where always strike first robs you of your unit? Or the rule that robs you of a unit, right?
Right.
You should learn that maybe I shouldn't have positioned this, or maybe I should have had some chaff, or maybe I should have done something else. But if you gravitate towards that one rule that you lost the die roll on, you're going to walk away learning the wrong lesson, I think.
That's
exactly
right.
I think that's something, like I've got my bravado stance, I got to really lean into my brand man. ABB, always be on brand. Screw the roll off. The real point is I don't like people who abuse the roll off.
I don't know anybody who ever has. I don't this imaginary straw man that you facilitate.
You know what?
I don't know.
He exists. He's got like the he's got the like the big mustache and the like the eyebrows. I've seen him around a few times.
Sure, yeah, he's out there tying
shoes together.
Yeah.
Yeah. Twirling his mustache like.
I have literally invoked that rule, and it's been there since the beginning of Warhammer. This is like some new introduction.
Yeah.
I've played Warhammer for 22 years, and I've invoked that rule less than a handful of times.
Yeah.
Okay? Because most of the time, guess what? We just go read the rules. And we're like, oh, okay, yeah, never mind. I screwed it up. That's how it should be.
Mm-hmm.
Or we go look at an FAQ or whatever, and then it's like, yep, there it is in text. Easy enough. Job's a good one. Right? In no way does it empower cheaters or bad actors. It empowers you to get back to playing the game when there's no other option to do. Right? Which is just like, and in no way does it say in tournaments you should cheat and then try to 4-up your way out of it. That's nonsense. Right? Like, obviously that person would be extricated immediately. I would call the judge and be like, this moron just said this thing. like, and I'm giving him a 1 in sports, and that's why. Okay, and that person would certainly be getting plenty of 1s and then be extricated from the community.
Right.
All right.
Well, this goes back to the point from before, is that the herd immunity against that guys.
That's right. Yeah, exactly. So like, I don't. It is a rule 0, but it's a much more constrained one, right? Because it requires. It's just saying this is a simple way to neutrally arbitrate something that you can, under no other circumstances, come to a conclusion on.
Right. I wonder if you. So I got to play devil's advocate there for a little bit, but I have to. My greater point overrides my devil advocacy, which is so very rarely does it come down to one instance, and I think that's the most valid argument for it. If I were to concede, which I won't, I think it's terrible rule.
That's fine. We'll let history and the viewers judge.
Right, and that's what I do. That's what RantCast does. Is we have various opinions, and we're just displaying opinions and the reasons we believe them, so that you guys can make the ultimate judgment call. That's why
you make the call. That's right.
Yeah. The choice is yours, dear viewer. So now we're going to tell you how to think about these strange interactions and always strange.
Back to ASL and ASL.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this is just it's bad. We're in a rules. We are in a now roll a 4+ to see who was right.
I've got my dice right here, Vince.
I don't have a D6 in range in here, so you win automatically, I guess.
Win by default. My 3 favorite words in the English language.
We've dug ourselves into a bad place rules wise here. Now, let me caveat this by saying the following. 1, the rules are in the best place they've ever been for most of AOS.
Yes.
2, these things come up rather rarely. Okay. And actually, although there's a number of these strange interactions, these 2 units meeting on the battlefield and actually slamming against each other is not the most common thing, right? 3, even if they do happen, it's not like, let's keep the forest for the trees in mind here, right? Which is that, like, the game is actually holistically very healthy. So, okay, we've set that baseline because I don't want any of this misinterpreted, right? To me being bashing on it, because I'm not bashing on my favorite game, right? Like, that's insanity.
Yeah. You don't devote hours and hours of making content because you hate the game.
Right, correct. I'm not hate content creating. No.
Yeah.
No, I'm not.
Oh man, I would love to do an episode like that though. Just
stupid thing. There seems to be a lot of people out there on the internet and on YouTube especially who do hate content create, who feed off of making hateful content. I've never understood that. I don't have time in life for that. Life is full of so many wonderful things.
Yeah.
Look around for it. I want to celebrate all the wonderful things. So, but that doesn't mean we don't take a step back every so often and inspect and adapt and ask how we improve. And so the answer is this is untenable. That's the bottom line. Like, the place we get to with this is that it is currently untenable. This is not how rules should function. Period. Reason number 1, it's a huge barrier for new players. Reason number 2, it will allow one player to catch another player out. There's a
gotcha, quote unquote.
The gotcha moment. Yep. There's a person in my club who, when we used to play back in the late 90s and especially 40K, when the rule tomes were huge and there was all these little weird nuances and interactions, he would play toward the interactions, and when we would step into them, he'd pull out the gotcha rule, right? Because there was some weird corner case that the rest of us didn't know about because we were playing casually, and then he would just flip the book and be like, nope, see here on page 287 in subparagraph B7, it says that I win this thing because of this rule. And there is no worse feel bad, right? Because, and by the way, that's the system's fault. Like, yeah, the player's being douchey, but they are playing the rules.
If you've got systems will be gamed if the system can be gamed. There is nothing wrong with that honestly. But you then need to clean up the system if you don't want it to be gamed in such a manner, and I don't think we do. And that's why
I want my gotcha moments to be
strategic.
Oh, yes, you didn't notice that you forgot to chaff around that edge, and you didn't realize that I could if I ran and charged this round, which I can do once a game, that I can get over that piece of terrain and get back and kill your character. That's the gotcha moment I want.
Yeah, right? I want my gotcha moment to be taking the pillar at the center of the table and flinging it into my own guys so that I rob Tom Lyons of precious points of murder.
Yes, absolutely. where you're using like something we're all aware of, and you're just playing smart in a completely unorthodox way that's hilarious, right?
Yeah. Killing my own guys so that like he can't do enough wounds to catch us on that particular secondary goal. Like I.
100%.
Yeah. Playing within the known commodities and then just doing something ingenious or strategically impressive or
Right.
silly.
I want to win because I play smart with my toys.
Yes.
Right? Like that.
Absolutely. 100%.
Yeah. Not because I knew a rules loophole that you weren't aware of, because of asymmetrical knowledge, right? I want to win because of asymmetrical strategy, right?
Yes.
And this completely enables that. The point here I make on this slide with the difference between how it interacts, how the Alvagar Ancient Rule, which I understand that's not the most popular thing, but it's just an easy explanation. It's an easy example. How the difference in how it interacts with a Demon Prince versus how it interacts with Hermdar, even though they're both ostensibly doing the same thing, fighting first in the combat phase, and yet we have two completely different outcomes.
Mm-hmm.
That is problematic under any circumstance, right?
Right.
It's just. Do you need to do your shout out? No shout out.
Unbelievable. Thank you so much for the follow there.
Yeah, you got a good radio voice shout out.
Yeah, man. I gotta do that. Unbelievable. Like you'll note that the notifications are all Ruby Rod from the Fifth Element because he is.
You don't need to explain to me why so Ruby Rod in the Fifth Element is amazing.
Okay.
This is also 100,000%.
The reason Ruby Rod is awesome. There's the commonality between Ruby Rod and why I paint models purple. And purple is the best color. Ruby Rod's character is supposed to be played by Prince, or was written with Prince in mind, and Prince in purple.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Tucker killed it in that role, man.
Oh, he did, like, because he was being an exaggeration of Prince, and like we started the show with flattery is the sincerest form of, or imitation is the sincerest form of flattery, or whatever, like that.
Yes.
That like turning it up to 11. It's fantastic. Yeah. Like the quintessential sidekick. When is a sidekick? Comedic sidekick enhancing to it like the entire experience when it's fucking Ruby Rod. Like
100%, man.
Put Ruby Rod in Star Wars in place of Jar Jar Binks, instantly a better. Prequels are instantly better.
Well, you could put like a sack of flour in the prequels in place of Jar Jar Binks and improve that movie. So that's not saying a whole bunch, but I take your beating.
Yeah.
At any rate,
back on this. Sorry. You stopped me to do the shout out. I had to.
Hey, look, this is the point of this. We're supposed to go down these holes, man. There are these rabbit holes. I'm with you, dude. You don't got to apologize to me.
Do you know why that is? Because you have inspired me.
Oh, good.
Everyone knows that the real show for Warhammer Weekly is the
I pick when we go down rabbit holes.
In the very beginning of the show, the first hour of Warhammer Weekly is the best hour of Warhammer Weekly, and I've just stolen that, combined it with a couple inspirations from a few of my other community members that I respect and admire, and boom, RantCast.
There you go.
With a healthy dose of my own ego.
Well, hey man, I'm happy to help. I'm glad I was able to assist.
Yeah. So back on this. So you were talking about.
And there's ways we could solve it, and I don't even know if I want to necessarily pitch out. One of the first things that happens when you share a problem like this is everybody jumps to solution. We should do this. Okay. Mm-hmm. Like, nope. That's you skipped a lot of steps there, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
Which is like, and this is what I mean by design process. This is why, yes, we're all empowered by Rule Zero and such to be game designers, but the reality is we're like, you should follow the process.
Was that a negative? Was that a negative dig on Rule Zero?
Yeah, it has a dark side. It made us all think we're just as good as Gary Gygax or Dave Arneson or Jeff Grubb or Monty Cook or whoever somebody who's dedicated their life to writing rules and understands the technology and the process better than somebody who just was a player of it. I've driven a lot of cars. I ain't trying to build one.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
There's just a difference there. Mm-hmm. Because the first step we should do is step back and go, okay,
what's wrong?
What's wrong? Is there actually a problem? So we established a problem. I think I do that here. The next step we should do isn't jump to solution. We say, why problem? Mm-hmm. Right?
Yes.
Why did this happen? And I don't mean like I need a root cause analysis of like it not going through a development team like I normally talk about that they should have a separate developer line. I mean, what in the game were we trying to achieve that this is where we got?
Yes.
Right? And when you look at it, like the concept of, combat in AOS, I actually really love. I think it's one of the best things they ever did. The back and forth, I go, you go combat. Yes. Fantastic, beautiful, interactive, fun, tactical, wonderful, all the way across. Best element of the game. Okay. So once you open that design space, that there's an alternating thing, well, then it becomes obvious that the next step is somebody can jump the line, right? That you're going to hand somebody a fast pass for Disney. Yeah. Mm-hmm. and that's such obvious thing. Like, of course there would be people who are super fast and can just like get into combat super quick, right? Because of speed.
It's the gunslinger. Right? You're like, like you're a quick draw contest. Yeah.
Boom.
Yeah.
Plus a zillion to initiative. By the time you've thought about fighting, they've shot you in the head.
Yeah.
Right? With 2 guns.
Yeah. Yeah, because yep, gunslingers and riffs are sweet. Quick draw initiative, baby.
Yes. Yeah. It's pretty sweet to just regularly go in the 30s, yes. Nobody has an initiative bonus.
They might have a +1 or 2.
No, I have played an Octoman and I have played a gunslinger, but I never played an Octoman gunslinger. So I am a worthwhile human being to some degree. I'm not that bad.
I see. I love gunslingers in narratives. I love gunslingers in basically everything because a gunslinger is always equal to the task of the plot. You just give them a better gun.
Absolutely.
Like Gene Starwind in Mephisto's not a weeb, but Gene Starwind in Outlaw Star, like he's got the gun that shoots spells. Like, boom, he can fight galactic like level bosses now. Like you just give Gunslinger better gun.
Firing out that like black hole gun in the first episode. Yeah, man, I love that. Outlaw Star is a great anime. That's awesome. I love that you reference that.
Yeah.
I also like ships with hands that fight, which is why I designed. Like we can't see them anymore, but the way I designed my Free Guild General and Griffin was one of the boats, and I gave.
Oh yeah, because the Outlaw Star, the spaceship actually has like hands, and they go melee combat. So this actually had a point bringing us back to melee combat is really sweet, and Age of Sigmar does melee combat really well. The you go, I go, the back and forth of it is good. Like that interacting with each other on each other's turn is a very it's a very wholesome part of the game. I think it's where you get that like that tension, the back and forth is assured, you know?
Yeah, exactly. Yes. And so I love that it functions like that. And the jump in the line thing makes sense. I think it should be used way more sparingly because like giving it to dwarves because they're angry, I do not support. No, sorry, one of your things is you're slow. Giving it to, somebody like some ultra elf or Slanesh or somebody like that, sure, that's fine. They're speedy.
I actually really like. I defended Locus of Diversion really early on. Before we crunched the numbers. Thematically, like the fact that they're like you're going last was functionally at the time. We just had the two things that did it, right? You either go first because you're Gristlegore, or you go last because. And functionally, they're the same thing, and they said they canceled each other out. In that. Even though it was the beginning of the quote-unquote activation wars and there was all the feels bad and everyone was mad about it, essentially they were functionally the same thing. And the flavor of why Locus of Diversion was the way it was like you're kind of like lured into this like slothful like lethargy because there's this demon who represents the
everything you want.
Yeah, just right there in front of you. And from a flavor standpoint, it makes a ton more sense in my mind than the Gristlegore dragon, just like you're fucking dead. You're a corpseified dragon. Why are you going twice before elves? Like why? Right. Like that part. So in the same vein, like the dwarves going twice before you, I thought Locus of Diversion, from a flavor standpoint, was a success for justifying this like going before you. But they're going before you. Because like you're like lured into this ecstasy, and they're gonna take their time killing you. They're not activating twice before you because they're fucking blazing fast. They're actually reveling in it. They're enjoying it. I thought that was good design in terms of like the flavor and the surrounding. The numbers might have been off, but the design that was there, and that's what I gravitated towards. And that's for that exact same reason. That's what's been bugging me about this is because like. When I think about the verisimilitude, right? The does it make sense aspect of it, I'm just going, this is beginning to bother me, you know?
It doesn't pass the smell test at all.
Right.
Right. So once we understand like the why of yes, this is because the first question we should ask is it valuable space to continue exploring, or should we just literally unwind all of this, right? And go and say this is just isn't a thing we do. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Because there can be some rules areas that are third rails, you know. One of the third rails they've tended to hold to quite strongly is screwing with the priority roll, right? Like in general, they other than like the
Dark Prophecy now,
Dark Prophecy, which doesn't really screw with the priority roll. It just lets you sort of have an alternative to the priority roll, right? You don't re-roll the priority rolls. You don't set the dice of the priority rolls in general. Like again, outside of a very, very few weird corner cases, it is what it is.
Yeah.
Right. And it's because that is a third rail they figured out they're not supposed to touch, and so they unwound all the stuff they were doing to screw with it, right? Mm-hmm. This could be this could be similar, but I don't think it is. I think the answer here is you just need to go back and re-examine what you're doing, and they say, okay, if this is valuable, one, how often do we use this? Because not every ability should be used equally, right? And you say like how one of the things that I've kind of encouraged in the past is for them to take more of a magic color pie theme thing, right? Where like white owns, white and red own first strike and own,
like what Magic the Gathering does, like with black has the gains and the card,
playing with the graveyard and
playing with the graveyard, discarding cards tends to be a black thing. Blue gets your counter spells. Yeah, exactly. Okay.
Yep. And I've said they should kind of take that same attitude, but align it thematically, if not to the alliances or the grand alliances, align it to like individual armies or individual sort of army themes. If this army is a tank-ish army, okay, OBR, Stormcast, whatever, right? Like a heavy armor, theoretically like slow-ish force that does these things. If that's the overall story, if that's the headline on this army, then it should have these kind of things it tends to employ and these kinds of things it doesn't. Or if it does, it employs them.
This is why I actually think Ossiarch Bone Reapers is a successive design, by the way.
Other than effects getting Ren, sure.
Sure, right. I mean,
and probably an across the board +1 save is too strong, but we can.
Right. I mean, the numbers might be wrong, but the design is there, and that's what that's what I always say is like we can season to taste with the numbers on things, right? Like just alter the spices. But like the design at its core is very strong for Bone Reapers. It, people are mad about because people are going to be mad about things usually. Like the internet just tends to like exist generally in a negative, I think, space. Not Twitter. So my Twitter feed is actually brimming with positivity, but that's because I pruned it as such. But still, like one of the things I saw, like they're Battleshock immune, and my brain just went. Like, God damn it, we've always been Battleshock immune. Like, that's an undead shtick. Before Battleshock was Battleshock, we were immune to it. You had to kill our necromancers, then our shit exploded. It's just a death thing. And now it's like there's been sort of like a nuclear arms race of things becoming Battleshock immune because they have a sippy cup or there's somebody says no standing right next to them. Like, yeah, of course we should get the next evolution of that as like our color wheel of abilities. We should be better at Battleshock immune because it's always kind of been one of our things. Demons get to fucking bring back models when they when weird things happen with their Battleshock because more tear through reality, and we get to be immune. Like, it's just those are things. And so I like where you're going with this is like because this also speaks to teaching your players the game. Actually, this makes the game a little bit easier to digest as a new player or a player who's going to switch gears. Like when you go. Certain armies play certain ways because we know these common rules tend to crop up. The tanky armies tend to have, maybe it's reroll saves.
You ready? Yeah. Reroll saves. That's exactly what I was going to say. Tilting shields in the combat phase, right? So the Sequitur / Mortek Guard ability, right?
Yeah.
That should be high on the list of what tanky armies get. Yep, that's a thing they do, right? They shield tilt, right? Adding rend to their attacks? No. That is not what.
Have you seen T-Rex teeths though? And they're made out of T-Rex teeths.
Yeah, sure. Like that's not what that army should be doing. Now you tell me Khorne is going to increase rend, right? Or you tell me witch elves or daughters of Cain are going to increase rend. Yeah, I'm on board for that. Yeah. Right now, getting feel no pains and backup feel no pains, rerollable feel no pains. Witch elves, no, you don't get that because you're in the we want to go murder people's faces section of the pie.
So you're
right.
Yeah, so you're saying like there's been some issues that crop up when the sections of that pie, that color wheel of abilities that you get based on the theme of your army, when some of those other stuff comes into your army, we get some conflict points.
Exactly, and by the way, it doesn't I'm not advocating to ring fence all of these completely.
Obviously,
because that leads to a bad design as well.
Yeah, homogenization is it's a different type of homogenization, right?
Exactly. What I'm saying is you need to be more thoughtful about your implementation of these things. Like, here you go. I'll give you a good example. Let's talk about the rend thing on somebody like OBR. Okay? All right, cool.
Yeah.
So OBR is a largely defensive phalanxy march in.
They're Spartans, right? They fight like Spartans. This is pretty much.
Yep, agreed. Big shield. So they, everybody in that army having shield tilt, I'm like, yep, everybody who has the shield, that is. Or whatever, being able to shield tilt, I'm like, yeah, 100% that makes sense. I got zero issue with that happening, right? The offense thing of rend or high rend attacks, if that was limited to one of their elite characters or their most elite unit that was built more to be their kill unit, and it was slightly overcosted vis-a-vis other kill units in the game, which is why one of the reasons I don't like comparing units across armies. I know everybody's blah, this thing in this army so cheap. Yeah, because it should be. Crappin' Beast of Chaos that runs across the table should be cheaper.
Yeah.
Right? Because that's its whole shtick. It puts out cheap bodies that go run across the table and do this stuff. You're going to tell me Beast of Chaos get a bunch of rend? Yeah, I'm on board. That's what they're doing. They are rust and entropy and the destruction of creation.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah. They burn it down. That's all. That's their entire army mentality. Just burn it down.
But if they started tilting shields.
Yeah. They don't even carry them.
I would be like, what are we doing here, guys?
Yeah.
Right? It just doesn't make sense anymore.
Yeah.
And so I think we just need to be a lot more thoughtful. And when we integrate these units, expect to overpay for them.
Well, Beast of Chaos is
to some degree.
Beast of Chaos is a fantastic example because it's on both sides of the point you're making here. In that, you pay you should, if your army doesn't fit the theme, your little color wheel, your slice of the pie, you should pay it for, if you can get it, it should be at a premium. Right?
Yeah.
Beast of Chaos, one of his glaring flaws is it just doesn't have traditional anvil units. Because the whole army, 420 blazes it. That's what it does. It wants to burn it down. It wants to run across the table and just smash and tear down the walls. That's all it does. Yeah. And so if you want to get your traditional anvil backline stand on the objective thing, you gotta really pay for it.
Right. Let me answer Luke's comment here, which he said, I do think that feel no pain should be a doc thing. Their devotion overcomes pain. No, I agree. I didn't say get rid of their feel no pain completely, but buffing the feel no pain from a 6 up to a 5 up and then allowing the reroll of it, that's where it gets a problem. Having them because they have a 6 up across the board because they have faith, fanatical devotional faith to Cain that can sometimes turn aside wounds. Yeah, man, I'm on board for that. That's thematically awesome. But again, they've effectively overpaid for that effect in some way, right, through the costing of the rest of their units, even if it's minimal, or it being a minimal effect like that. It becomes problematic when they're then able to go when then their cauldron is putting out +1 armor save. Why does the cauldron broadcast a +1 to save? I've never in my life understood that. The murder unit, the murder army focused on murder, built an idol to murder and has their murder priestess driving it around celebrating murder, and it broadcasts a shield of protection. When did the murder situation become a white mage? None of that is sensible. Okay, if you told me it drove around and broadcast an aura of +1 damage, or it could make a unit +1 rend, or it could make a unit reroll hits, or any of those offensive things, I don't care. Pick a thing, right? I would be like, yeah, because that's what edifices dedicated to murder would do.
Woo! Oh man, you should be spamming some like emotes in chat right now. That was spicy. No, I get it. No, I'm on board with you for a lot of that. And one of the things that you talked about, third rail moments, just as a rule, and I think we've seen it begin to crop up in the newest set of releases, but re-rolling or redundant after saves, I just think that's kind of a bit of a...
It's a third rail. Feel no pain should never be re-rollable, period, end of story. Yeah. And you should have to be Archeon to get above a 5+. Let me just say that.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
So
or like a god of death who just like laughs
sure.
at death. Like
yeah. Like that's what I mean. Like you should be Archeon, Nagash. You should be those.
Lariel actually should probably have something like that because she's a goddess of life.
Should. Yeah, 100%. Like that's a bit of an oversight that the goddess of life can't turn aside any damage ever. But once you get over 500 points, if you want to start having to feel no pain at a 5-up or even a 4-up in some cases, I'm probably okay with it. If you're willing to throw a quarter to a third of your army at something, that probably has 12 or 14 wounds, right? Yeah. Like that math doesn't work because right now, like I said on the show this week, the game is way tilted towards, Bestigor. You get what? Best. Yeah, Bestigor are awesome. They're what, 120 right now?
120 for 10. What is it? 4s and 3s. They get +1 off the charge. They can reroll if it's against order. So they get efficient in the right matchups. In fact, their rules, they're a fucking... I love Bestigors, and not just because like I love Bestigors. I think they're a successive design. Their rules tell you how to play them.
100%.
The rules.
I think they're a great. I was talking about Melvin when you were gone. They're a great Melvin scroll.
Yeah. I might be probably. I think I tend to lean a little Melvin-y when I like. They just. I love rules that show what they should do, and I like big. I do get a little Timmy in the end result. Like I played. I was a big fan of Pro.
You can be both because those aren't those. It's appreciation versus psychographic.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. I love Probant. Probant was like one of my favorite. So this is Progenitus, Natural Order Progenitus Bant. So your control deck, mid-range grinder, that has the big finish. Like that's how I love playing that deck. I love Survival Bant before it got fucking banned. But Survival with like I had Survival. I had Loyal Retainers. Like Emrakul combo, so like the big finish, but then I'm playing just a straight control deck essentially. I like that design space. Personally, that's a me thing though. That's me. Sure. Everyone's got their own thing they like. I think there's so many armies that you really can kind of pick your flavor and go toward it, whether it's aesthetic or if you like aesthetics more than you like game design or rule design. Like there's so much of it in this game, and we are trending, and we need to come back to this as we talk about this, and there's some spicy takes out there. We both are of the mind that the game is I'm going to talk for myself, the best it's been. Like I think it's the best it's been. But then that makes some of these feels bad moments where you're going, why is that like that? It does kind of go, well, can we fix this? Should we fix this?
Yeah. Like, and by the way, Luke, no, Phoenix Guard should absolutely not have a 4+, and neither should Hearthguard Berserkers. No normal infantry unit should have a 4-up after save. That's nonsense. Just literally insane.
Yeah.
If you told me they had a 5-up, I'm cool. And by the way, it still satisfies their I walked through fire or whatever dumb crap they did. It isn't like everybody else doesn't have. Well, Varangard are 1 in 10 million, so like you got to be a knight, and then 1 in 1,000 become a lord, and 1 in 1,000 of those become a Varangard. So you got to be 1 in 10 million, sort of chaos champions become a Varangard. That seems tougher than walking through a dumb fire, but he's not rocking around with some kind of feel no pain or 4-up. So get out of here. You know what? You can keep your 4-up, and now they're 500 points for 10. There you go. I'll agree with that. Yeah. So if you want a unit of 30, they're 3/4 of your army, and then I'm more than willing to accept.
Well, that's the thing is, like, you can do really big, awesome stuff if you pay for it. Is another theme that I think is pretty important. Like,
sure.
Like Dark Prophecy. Why do I ultimately not? Like, why am I actually way okay with Dark Prophecy? I do hope that they make it the gamble. Like, you can, if you look at the die, you committed to the die. Like I want to see that, but as it stands, it's kind of like you get 2 priority rolls, which I'm not the biggest fan of. But, like, I love the rule. I think it's great. And it's attached to an 800-point character. Like,
Yeah,
it's allowed
very
to...
hard to fit into lists.
Yeah, like, you're buying an 800-point model, then, like, you get to be good. Like, that's your, like, headline, 800-point model is good at the game of Age of Sigmar. Like...
Yeah, and by the way, I don't care if they get emulated into Ash Nightly. If it's like literally a thing they do before they brush their teeth and then get emulated and get reborn, they still should have a 4-up. At any rate, when it comes, so just to swing us all the way back.
Yeah, I'll bring it back.
The thing with this is if we say yes, okay, this is worth it, it's good, it satisfies a thing, there's verisimilitude, it makes sense, it's worthwhile, it doesn't disrupt the game, then we can say, okay, what are our potential solutions? What's the range of things? Too often people jump to a single solution. Mm-hmm. When really what you should do is, okay, our next step is to provide 5 or 6 potential solutions, mm-hmm. right? And then say, which of these makes the most sense, right? What's going to be the overall best, and to really trace out the second order consequences as best we can of making those decisions. Yeah. And in that route, you could go things like you don't activate abilities anymore that aren't triggered at the start of the phase. Things like ASF are just always on, you know what I mean? Whereas something like ASL happens. You could write everything like locus and say that, if these two things meet, they just cancel out. Matter, antimatter, they don't explode, they just stop and become nothing, I guess. You could turn the start of combat phase, now that we have enough stuff fighting up here, to stop being I do all of my start stuff and then you do all of your start stuff, to actually say we alternate in all 3.
Yeah, like, I mean, you're already alternating combat activations. Traditionally, you were alternating combat phases or combat activations. Why not activate your abilities? Yeah. If you want to do the
start of phase and end of phase triggers, maybe the right answer is we alternate back and forth between there. So at the start, I decide to tilt shields. That's my first thing I'll do. Now you get a choice. Okay, I'll decide to fight. Now I get a choice. Okay, I'll decide to activate this other ability. And right?
Yeah.
Like, my point is there's lots of different ways we could go with it, and what we need to do isn't jump to any one of them.
My proposed fix, and it's just one proposed fix, one solution, is I think there needs to be like a quote-unquote buff phase. Like, I think you actually, we have an in-between rounds, like the weird in-between rounds phase right now with you move spell portals now. We have an in-between phase. Like, the game already has, like, in-between phases. With Locust going off at the bottom of the charge, we kind of created an in-between phase between the bottom of the charge and the beginning of combat, I think. And so I just say, you take all those abilities, the things that, tilting your shields, there's no reason tilting your shield shouldn't happen at a similar speed to something that strikes first. There's no reason that a guy, like the Sequitur walking around with the actual shield at all times, like on a battlefield,
completely by surprise, and is like, what the heck?
Whoa, I'm crazy. Like, they're surprised by the fact that the Ghoul King on Terrorgeist looks undead, and then it's just like fucking blazing speed. Like, oh shit, I thought I had a moment for a smoke break here. I forgot to pick up my shield.
Yeah, forgot to use his shield, I guess. Yeah, so, exactly.
And I'm not saying that, and when I say that I think there needs to be a buff phase, I am not saying that, always strikes first and always strikes last and stuff like that should be part of the buff phase, by the way. Like, I think that there should be a
saying a separate phase for the activation of abilities versus the combat itself.
Correct.
Yes, and I agree. That's another potential way we could go. And I'd love to talk that through and what does that actually mean?
And then what does that mean to the game, right? Yeah. Because after you propose solutions, you have to go, is this the best next you go, does this solve the problem?
Right.
And then, is this the best solution for the problem?
That's right. Yep.
So, those are 2 checks you have to do. Because, so oftentimes someone proposes a solution, but does it solve the problem? Or does it create a new one?
Yep.
Because now
that's the challenge, right? We get to that point where we propose a solution, and then we're done.
That's it. No, I've got the solution. Yep. Done. Right. Write the check.
Ooh. Yeah, exactly. And that's not the right way to go. You need to actually sit there and think through, what's going to happen because of this? What are the what are the impacts of this? How does it actually play? You do some testing with it. You see if it feels good. You ask the question, does this make sense? Is it intuitive? If I hand this to a new player, are they going to get it, right? There's all these sorts of things. Like, there's all these additional tests and things you have to do. And you can't just stop by saying, yep, here's our one thing, we're good now. Like, that's just the wrong way to go, right?
Right.
So to me, this is something that needs to be addressed. And I'm not going to presume to say I know what the right answer is, because I don't. I don't know what the right answer is, because I haven't done all the work yet, right? Like, that's for all of us to, and ostensibly really the game designers, I suppose, to kind of figure out together. Like, this one needs addressed, because otherwise what's going to happen is, it is pretty rare that these things smack against each other now, but guess what? Give it another year of adding new armies, especially Heish armies, which, guess what? I bet when some of them show up, the realm that has the ability
light speed.
Yeah, where you literally fight before everybody else.
Yeah.
Guessing it's going to be a thing that some of those armies have to do with. We may want to have this solved up by the time that all occurs.
Yeah.
Right? Because if we're still screwing around with that, and this crap starts happening every game, it's going to get real obnoxious.
Well, and
real fast.
The game already has a lot of time invested into the components of it. Combat is the fun one. I would hate to bog it down with extra steps that slow it down, because conflict breeds interest, breeds engagement. Like, the conflict of combat is one of the best parts of this game. Like. Like, I don't say that to sound like I'm hating on spells and shooting, but when it gets right down to it, I love my Nagash army, because despite having an oppressive spell phase, it still won in combat. It drowned you in skeletons or ghosts if you were on that build. Like,
and also because magic is ultimately stupid. Yes,
magic. Oh, fuck. What? Magic is the coolest. Like, how could you?
Magic in AOS is ultimately dumb, and I hate it. My favorite thing is when I play armies without a spellcaster in it, which I do quite frequently.
My heart, Vince.
You have the gosh all day long and twice on Sunday. Give me some orcs that want to run across the table and punch people. Teleports are for people who don't have enough mighty destroyers in their army.
Yeah.
Get more command points. I'll teleport into your face by running there. Watch me teleport my fist into your face. That's what I say.
I like spells. I like spellcasters. I like the idea of warping reality and then just like fucking around. I think that's fun. I like wizards, cool. Man.
This is my bravado period where I'm just being funny.
Yeah. I know. No, I just, so like I said, like a worst case scenario would be to come up with a solution, rushing into a solution.
Right.
And then you've actually done more harm than good. Because right now you do have corner case situations, but going forward, something's got to happen. Canceling out seems like the cleanest, but does that maybe devalue some of the strategy that can happen, right?
Maybe, maybe not. I don't know.
Right. I mean, we don't know, right? Yeah.
Yeah, that's why we need to talk it through. Yeah, exactly. Right. Yep. All right, man. Well, let me say this. I will need to call it a day here pretty soon. Anything else you wanted to talk about before we finish up?
I guess I'll have to interview you on how Warhammer Weekly
came into. Do you want the quick story? I can give it to you.
Yeah, give me the quick story. Like, how did you? I mean, you are like the preeminent show. I think. How many people you inspire? Not to like. I don't know. You just made fun of my favorite things in the world, and now I'm about to talk about how great you are. But no, you really. I mean, you really are one of the firm fixtures of the zeitgeist of the AOS community. Like, how did you? You've been doing it a long time too. Like, Warhammer Weekly goes back. Well, you predate Age of Sigmar, don't you?
Correct. Yes, we were doing it before AOS. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we're about to celebrate our 5-year anniversary here in January. Okay. Mm-hmm. And so, which will be January, like it's the 28th, I think is the actual date, but it doesn't matter. And yeah, we started in fantasy. So here's what happened. Back in Warhammer Fantasy times, when I started doing some YouTubing and stuff like that and getting involved in the scene, and started making, videos and stuff like that, there was this guy named Nick. He was from Long Island, and he had a channel called Long Island Wargaming, and a couple times he had run a show called Warhammer Weekly. Okay, and he tried to like get together a show and kind of do whatever, and he never really got off the ground. Then he kind of dropped off the scene. And this was like a year before I had started, right? And the year before I had wanted to take this back. And so then I said, I was kind of sitting around, and I had been making some videos, but I really wanted something that I could sink my teeth into and make like a permanent fixture, right? And I reached out to Nick and I said, hey, do you ever plan to actually do anything with that again? You know, you did a few episodes, are you ever going to touch it again? He said, no. And, I said, okay, cool. Well, I'd like to take it. And so he said, fine. No issue. He didn't have any problem with it. And so then I reached out to Tom and said, look, you've got a big ego. Would you like to be my co-host for this? And, we'll do it. I mean, Tom's been my friend for years and years and years and years now. I've known Tom since I was 15. So, I mean, I've known Tom I'm going to put it this way. I have known Tom for more years than I haven't known Tom. How about that?
Yeah, that's a good way to put it, yeah.
And so he said, sure. And then that was it. And like, when I start something like this, I'm very serious about it. Okay. Mm-hmm. Like I didn't take this lightly. I said, if we're going to do this, we're going to do it. And, in 5 years, I haven't missed a show, right? Like come rain or shine or anything like that. I've always made this my priority because I do take it very seriously. And I hope everybody knows that like my goal is always to be there, to be fun, to be entertaining and interesting and stuff like that. That, I never want to ruin anybody's day or bring anybody negativity or anything like that. We might talk about some negative stuff every so often, but I always want to do it in a fun way, in a positive way, and hopefully some way that makes it at least interesting and engaging.
It's really important when you like love something that you do like look at some of the negative aspects of it. You can't just bury your head in the sand, right? Because then you run the risk of those things taking over. And so it's worthy talking about it, but I think you have to be mindful of how you frame talking about stuff on the internet. You just must be. And I think that's one of the things that Warhammer Weekly just does, that I am like, I want to be more like Warhammer Weekly when I have my hot takes and my rants, like where I'm bringing out the digital soapbox to have fun with it, but then I have to dial it back down to zero and be like, but what is, what's really going on, and have a positive outcome on the end of the hot take or whatever, right?
Right.
It's something I've been very mindful of, and I owe a lot of that to like kind of identifying Warhammer Weekly and being like, I want to be like Vince and Tom.
But yeah, I mean, because the reality is, guess what? There's like, you want negativity, it's super easy to find. It's freaking everywhere, and like I'm just not that guy. Like I'm never gonna be the one given the like spicy takes of negativity and stuff like that. I mean, we'll make jokes, and you and I have made a bunch of jokes here.
Tonight, yeah, we've had a blast with it.
Like those kinds of jokes are fun, but it's always that, because when it comes time to actually like have a real discussion, I consider myself lucky every day that I get to talk about it, and that like that one person will listen is an amazing blessing. So yeah. Like I'm never gonna be angry at what's going on or sort of whatever. We'll just talk about it. We'll figure it out. We'll get through the feelings, and then we'll move on. Well, and we'll play some more fun games.
Yeah. You caught me with the roll off rule, because like I'm trying to be like spicy hot take, and then I'm like, well, now I have to dial it into reason now because you said something constructive, and so now I have to talk about the constructive point, and I can't just be on my hill and die on it now, because the goal is to always end up with like that positivity on the tail end. Not positivity doesn't necessarily mean say everything is good. Positivity means on the end, for me anyway, on the end, have something worthy to add to the discussion.
Yeah, it means be honest and frame things in a positive light. Like you can say, like it's no different than when I give feedback for people with to what they paint, mm-hmm. right? Like if I were to give people feedback with what they paint, and my response was, well, that really sucks. That's terrible. Like no one's going to listen to what you say or want to hear you or take their feedback, and they're not going to hear what you say. And the reality is they put time and effort and work and love into doing whatever they did. What they got is what they got. Your job isn't to tell them that they're bad. Your job is to work with them to figure out how you can help them take their next step, right? That's all that matters. And I feel the same about most of this stuff. Like, yeah, regardless, you can frame things however you want. It's not being dishonest in any way. It's being generous of spirit, right? To understand that there are human beings involved in all of this stuff that you're talking about. Like there's nobody, like it just showed up one day and just burst into existence, a holy miracle, when it's not the work and sweat and tears and pain and somebody going to work to attempt to provide food for their family and is stressed about their wife and their kid got sick, and then there's somebody in the office who's being kind of a jerk, and we tend not to see each other as human beings, right?
Especially on
And
the
it's
internet.
just a
Especially
delivery
on the
mechanism.
internet. Yeah.
And I always think of there's what is it? It's the book of the book of infinite sorrows or whatever, with the term like sonder or something like that. The realization that every human being you see is living just as full and rich of a life as yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? That they are all the protagonists of their own story, and you are as transitive and figmenty to them as they are to you.
Yeah.
I think about that a lot because
Well, part of the perception is reality, and each individual's perception and their reality, therefore, is valid to them, right? Like, yeah, you think about that a lot. Continue.
yeah, and so I just think like what I'm always trying to do is keep in mind the basic humanity of everybody involved in this stuff in all parts of the discussion, and like I said, just be constructive, be generous, be human, and treat other people like I would want to be treated if I was creating something.
Well, like I had my AOS worldview rocked with Nagash and some of the changes that happened to him at the beginning of the year, and it was like a little bit of it was like not projection, but like offloading personal issues into a game, because I use the game for positive results too. And so sometimes if negative stuff happens in the outside world, I mean, the simplest version of that is I can be an asshole to you because I had a bad day in any situation, right? Like, I can be an asshole to you on the table because I had a bad day. Usually I'm not. Usually the productive and the good side of me comes out because I'm at my best when I'm doing the things I love best, right? Whatever that may be. But, like, I had this thing where I'm like, suddenly I'm not playing the army I love the most, that I had been playing, got me into the game of Age of Sigmar, and it had just been all wins because AOS 2.0 came out, and, like, Umbral Spell Portal was a thing. So this mechanic that I fucking love, the Hand of Dust, which was only 3 inches, suddenly I'm like, I can make it across the table? Woo! Like, I was just high, and I came crashing way down. And when the discussions on Slaanesh started to crop up the way they did, I immediately thought of you. And this humanizing element of, we talk about armies that are problem, Petrifex Elite, Fire Slayers, Blob before that. If you didn't have a negative opinion about the Blob, you're not allowed to have a negative opinion about Petrifex Elite. There's a hot take for you. You being the royal.
The nebulous you, yeah.
Like it's like, it's so easy to be like, this is a problem. And it's so easy to forget that there's people behind that army, behind that play style, people who designed it's so easy to just forget that other side of the equation. And I decided I never want people to feel bad playing the things they love, one way or another, because Slaanesh players were starting to feel bad, like the true hard-boiled love the army, were playing it when it was all metal, when half of it was still fucking metal models, still love the army. Like, I never want them to come crashing down the way I did.
Yeah, I mean, to answer LLB's quick question in the comments, which was, do you think the sort of it's fine mentality can be negative? Yes, if you're truly just hand waving away problems. I don't think, I opened my discussion of the ASF and ASL thing there at some point by saying this is untenable and needs to be fixed, right? But then I walked through the reasons. Hot takes, like, no offense to the point of the show, like, hot takes are fun on the internet. It's fun to be humorous and to josh around. As
the joke is that the hot takes aren't very hot.
Sure, but like, if you want to see actual change, guess what? It isn't cocking off on the internet.
Yeah,
that doesn't do anything.
Yeah.
Except make people mad, right? And the nature of the internet is that it wants to inspire this sort of extremist type of thinking. And I mean, I spent a lot of time, my formal training is in philosophy. There is no such thing as an extreme, right? Because when you take extreme positions, you get proven wrong immediately. You have to have nuance and forethought and care and understand, like, all the different layers of things. That's my background. And in my estimation, like, you're better served if you believe there's legitimately a problem, then you have to make your case. Mm-hmm. It'll be much harder for people to it's fine you if you've legitimately went out there and done the work and made a strong case. Does it mean it won't happen some? Oh, there's always going to be people on both sides of an equation.
Yeah.
Like who will still it's fine you, right? For example, me during a lot of the early part of Slanesh, where I was very hard to be moved and was wrong. Okay. And you know, I've said that openly and many times because I was failing to appreciate just how deep the problem was.
To be fair, you did say a point in there which I still think was true, is what I saw with LON. I noticed some. I don't want Slanesh to be LON. Obviously, they were better, winning more, so on and so forth. They had elements that were different from what LON was doing, so it's not like a perfect metaphor. But, like, some people weren't putting in the work to learn how to play against it either. Because they immediately got told that it's the busted thing, so they didn't even think to work the problem, going, for whatever reason. You said something like, in part of your... I guess what I'm saying is, you were hard to move from your position, but you were hard to move from your position because you were coming at it from a place of actual statements that were factual. It's just the numbers in the end, right? Like, it always comes down to the numbers. You know, the position was sound for these reasons, but the numbers just were different on the back end, the outcome, right? Like,
Yep.
like,
yeah. I mean, that's ultimately what I think about that question, LV, is that, like, yes, it can be if we're all running around blind, right? And sure, like you said, you don't sugarcoat anything. You should. Let me be honest. You should start sugarcoating. Like, because here's the thing. Try not sugarcoating with your wife. See how far that gets you in a discussion. Okay? Where it will get you is divorced real fast, or sleeping on the couch, or something like that. I sugarcoat all the time with my wife because I have to, because there's emotions involved. Like, that's sort of this false enlightenment thing that I can just be brutally honest, and like that there is some separation between logic and emotions. That's a false dichotomy that was invented in the Enlightenment. All facts have emotions in them. Period. There's no separation. That's a false thing in the brain. Okay, that is a myth of the modern age. It's not real. Facts are emotional. All decisions are made with emotion. Period. There's been a couple great brain studies if you want to go look them up. They're wonderful people who've had brain damage, who had the emotional centers of their brain damaged to the point where they didn't work anymore. They lose the ability to make decisions. Like, what time do you want to go to lunch today? They'll be silent. They have no answer. Because they without their ability to feel any kind of emotions and make value judgments, they stop making decisions. Period. Even knowing 2 or 2:30. Nope, too hard. Can't do it.
Well, there's
So just to finish this out.
Yeah.
Like, the point being is that, like, what we ultimately want to do, the people who are theoretically on the other side of the fence want a good game, right? That seems true. I want a good game. That seems true. So, like, yes, sometimes we're going to need to be friendly. It like, sugarcoating it has this sort of negative connotation that you're not being truthful. You can be nice and truthful, and, like, you can still, like, understand that emotions are simply part of every decision. This is just psychological reality. And that you can be generous in how you express your facts. You can walk people through a problem. You can be sympathetic to how we got here. And in general, that will bring the other side there. Like, again, when I get in a dispute with my wife, I don't just go up and go, you did this, you did this, you did this, I'm right. Right? Because that's a good way for me to get in big trouble.
Well, I think another, like, one thing I struggled with for a long time was, I hate pathos arguments, but I found out the merits in pathos or emotional debate is the audience. So often, like, when you're arguing with someone, A, B, me, you, right? Like, we get into a Twitter spat, whatever. Like, we're trying to get extra clicks, so we just, like, start making fun of each other. The audience around us is going to formulate opinions based on what we say to each other. And so this is another case for why you need sugarcoating. It is maybe I don't like the terminology, but AOS Coach said something a little bit earlier, which is the difference between negative and constructive often comes down to delivery. It is very important to be mindful of your delivery. You know, like, I just think that's a reality of the world we live in. This wacky internet world with talking heads on your computer screen and in your earbuds. Like, it's important to realize that the people listening to your debate matter, even if you're having an A-B conversation between you and somebody else or whatever, because that stuff's all broadcast. But also then, when you are talking to somebody, if you want them to come to your side of the fence, they're not going to come to your side of the fence if you're like, you know, being a dick. Like,
sure. And that's not what, and that's clearly not what LLV is saying. Right?
No.
And I totally, so I'm sympathetic to this position. And by the way, I understand LLV. I'm not going to wade into the waters of something I don't know about, which is autism. I would say look up the research around that, because I don't, like, it's not as though, from my understanding of it, which is limited at best, and you have a much better understanding that you've lived it. There's a different emotional resonance to all that stuff like that, but your brain is still capable of making value judgments. You don't have brain damage in the part where your emotional center literally doesn't function, as I understand it. But again, you know your own life better than me. I will say that I certainly understand what you mean, being somebody who is effectively a high functioning sociopath. So like like I recognize these things in other people, but my wife often wonders why I'm a block of ice. So I get it. But I think my point is we can train ourselves.
I mean, you be conscious of it.
Yeah.
Empathy is a learned.
Like I grew up and Meth, I bet this is, you've been open about this, so I don't feel like we're stepping out of line here. I grew up in a household with a lot of rockiness to the emotional state of it. I know you were in a similar place, right?
Yeah.
And it screws with the way you see the world, right? And how you experience your own emotions. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, it's just a matter of it is something you have to train yourself with. It was deliberate practice, the same as anything else for me, right? To how to bring people over to your side is that you get more with honey than vinegar. You can hear that platitude, but it took a long time to actually learn it and internalize it and learn how to hopefully work with people. And by the way, you're still never going to convince everybody.
No.
But my argument would be, if we want the game to get better, the people who are designing it want the same thing. And if we're nice about it and generous with it and kind of put stuff out there like that, people won't get as mad. Now, that being said, LLV, I love what you do, and you're the man. I've said so repeatedly. And let me say this: at the same time, don't heed too much of that negativity on the internet when you put out facts, because the reality is there will always be some people who are just going to willingly put their head in the sand, and you're going to get negative kickback from, no matter how genuine you are, no matter how generous you are, no matter how much you do even sugarcoat it, whatever that means. You're right, man. It's the internet, and everybody has an opinion, and some of them just aren't good ones. So like you can't get around that. And I like, you should know that you are doing good work and that you are doing important stuff for the health of AOS. Period. Full stop. Okay. Mm-hmm. So if some negativity ever comes your way because of a delivery, my answer would be, in most cases, that sucks, but that it's undeserved. So there, that's my answer to LV, who I consider to be truly one of the great standing, great outstanding heroes of our community for all the hard work.
The thing is, you can disagree with someone also and not be negative is the part of it.
Of course.
And I think that like I had to learn to value the emotional arguments and the emotional state of people more than I realized I had to, because I did come at stuff from a pure logic. Logic is emotionless initially. And then I realized eventually that you can't disconnect the two. My interactions in my personal life have improved because I've begun to value my partner's emotions more. Because she very heavily values the emotional sides of interaction and debate.
That's a hell of a journey for me too, man. So I understand what you're saying.
Yeah, and like for me, I'm like you are wrong right now. Like, this is the fact of what happened, and you're wrong. Like, the number of times I just feel like you're wrong. That's like, you are just wrong, and to not actually have an emotional conversation. How much worse my life was. It's important to. I mean, I've had to practice and get better at that aspect. It's something I do think that, and I think everyone's got their own barriers developmentally or whatever. My emotional trauma leading up to like where I am now has been a long and constant battle. Not the same as anyone else's, but like it's still like it's been a conscious effort, I guess is all I'm saying, and I think that you can put in those conscious efforts into some of these problems. On the other hand, some people just are going to disagree with you or be negative.
Some people will be willing,
and then why waste your time with them?
Exactly. Yep.
And
separating the willingly obtuse into the potential to be changed is one of the great challenges of life. Yes.
Yeah. How do you reason somebody out of a position they didn't reason themselves into, right? Like you can't. And on the other hand, like, you know, what facts and evidence do you give people to get them to care about facts and evidence? Like, there are certain like hang-ups to the conversation, and then again from there it's like, how do you frame it? Well, positivity or not, or criticism, whatever. Yeah, I think the stats are I've already told you all of you, we've talked about this. I think the stats are very, very important. What alternate universe did we live in before there were stats to this stuff? It was just people pulling out
a bad one.
Well, that's the thing, is like you say something completely baseless without anything to even point to. You know.
Yep. So, pretty much, that was the world.
Like, okay, cool. So, like, I think this thing is too powerful. Like, okay, well, what's the numbers say? Now, I will say that there are
people who misuse LLB statistics.
What's that?
I said people who misuse LLB statistics.
Yes, that.
Of course, LLB is not amongst them, but yes, there are some people who. I mean, it's like any powerful tool. Sometimes they get in the wrong hands.
Yeah. I mean, even how you frame a stat can change the end point you're trying to make, right? So yeah, that was cool. Did you finish how, like, the fast forward of Warhammer Weekly to where it is now? Like you said, how it started.
I mean, that was it.
That was it. Okay, and then we ended up on this. Cool, awesome, man. Thanks for sharing that. And then I wrote Rosewater in my notes to talk about him and how I watched the video for Rosewater, one of the rules designers for Magic.
Yeah, great video.
It's a great video, and the one thing he said is, like, it's really that I kept circling and kept coming up, that we kept kind of dancing around, which is players are really, really good at identifying problems.
And really bad at finding solutions. By the way, it's the same in software design and everything else in life, yes.
Yeah, I mean, I did...
are good at finding one and not the other. Yep.
Yeah, I've done a lot of play testing and, beta testing video games, actually, like, alpha testing some video games and stuff like that. I've been on various parts of the sort of tail end of the design for, like, D&D. I got one of the PDFs for D&D 5e, so I probably played some of your work that you consulted on.
Hey, there you go. Well,
yeah, so I do a lot of, like, on that end, and there was a point earlier in here, someone mentioned that, like, by the time playtesters get involved in the design process, like, they're very... I don't know how it works in Age of Sigmar. I just know from my experience, you tend to be kind of near the tail end of that process. You might not have as much sway in changing the trajectory of design as...
Well, right, because ostensibly it should be stress testing.
Stress testing.
Not we take this all back to formula and completely rewrite all the rules.
Yeah, you're stress testing, and you're saying, where do we put that salt and pepper? Where do we, fine tune the numbers at, right? Like, that's usually where you're at on that. In game design, usually video games, you're testing very specific criteria. With game design. So, like, usually you're testing some very specific stuff. I think a lot of people play to, like, open beta for, like, an MMO and think that that's what, like, play testing a video game is like. No, like, you're running the same fucking hallway over and over and over again, or the same, like L-shaped corridors.
Well, look at, like, Dark Age of Camelot, right? They're Camelot Unchained. Their new thing is a true old school beta where it's like you're getting in and we're doing this one test of this one thing. Everybody needs to get on the server and jump over this wall repeatedly for the next hour, right?
That's have fun. Yeah, have fun. Yeah, run down the same if you ever read any of my old video game reviews, the amount of hatred I have for L-shaped corridors comes through.
Sure.
The reason is because of the my time spent alpha beta testing video games and stuff. So yeah, that was a fun little rabbit hole. No, I again, to wrap it up with the rules and design, I think with these strange interactions, the community has identified a problem.
And now we just need to get it fixed.
and now we need to get it fixed, and with the full breadth of what that means.
Yep.
That your input on the internet only goes so far. Games Workshop has proven they're listening now, though. I'm going to count that community article that came out right before the FAQ as patch notes. I'm counting it. I'm taking the win. We said we wanted patch notes. They said a little. They prefaced the FAQ changes. so moral victories are victories as well.
Well, and that's another thing. This was like a stellar FAQ, like great all over.
Yeah.
All of the Slaanesh changes. Very excited that I can get them back off the shelf and actually play them again.
Well, and this goes to this. I actually had like I had my opinion on how I thought they should change the Slaanesh rules. You know, I said the blanket 4.
Yep, which I would have been fine with.
I think a lot of people would have been fine with. I like theirs better. I will admit I like that it does keep the value on a Keeper of Secret or on a KOS, because it is a greater fucking demon, and they should be better than like some other rando hero. You know, like
more alluring and distracting.
Yeah, exactly. And so like that was the flaw I didn't recognize in my own rules. Like suggestion was like, oh yeah, like now by coming up with a solution, have I created another problem? Well, yeah, I've devalued some of the fluff and the flavor aspect of the game, which we spent a long time talking about how settings and all that surrounding stuff help make the game so that we enjoy more enjoyable.
Absolutely. No, I agree completely. Like, it is not the type of thing to be undervalued. Like, having especially your big, awesome centerpiece pieces feel like big, awesome centerpiece pieces.
Yes.
You know, is there anything worse than a big piece that's Garbo? Like, if there's any tragedy of the Eidolons, it's that they've never felt like they're worth their points. Mm-hmm. And they are, like, the coolest model in, one of the coolest models in AOS, and certainly, like, the coolest thing in that range, which is full of, like, amazing models.
You could easily plant your flag. A lot of these, what's the model of the decade going around on the internet right now? You could easily plant your flag in Eidolon and Mathland. Like, easily plant your flag in that one as the best model. And I, like, people would disagree. They're allowed to. I would be one of them that would disagree. But, like, I don't not see it, you know? Like, I'd be like, oh yeah.
That's like the Maw Crusher feeling. Like when you pilot a Maw Crusher around the table, you're like, oh yeah, this is what that should feel like. I am just, boom, blow you up.
Yeah, well, like by like extension, Haywo's Stonehorns. Like I know the power. I've been there.
Oh my god, yes, dude.
The monster trucks.
Plow through my army last week. Let me tell you what. Yes, he was running both a Murder Horn and a Crunch Horn, and that Murder Horn, boy, does he earn his name. That is not a joke name.
We're starting to see both of them. I was watching some Doom and Dark. I've invented a new genre of Twitch, by the way. I was watching battle reports while painting and like commenting on the battle reports. And Doom was running a Murder Horn and a Crunch Horn, and I'm just like every time, I'm just like, these are great.
Watching those plow through that Slaanesh army, I was like, yep, that feels about right. Like, interestingly, I do think that especially the BCR part will be a big giant challenge for Slaanesh. It's really hard, like especially ethereal Stonehorns are like more or less unbreakable by Slaanesh. It's really interesting thing.
Yours bounced off of Haywo. Like he
I did like 2 wounds to it.
Yeah, and he just like turned his head like the full 180, like he was facing the other direction, just like turns his head and his whole body swivels underneath him, and then just like and just smash the KOS.
One of the hidden...
And that was Old Locus.
Sure. One of the hidden weaknesses of Slaanesh is high armor.
Yeah.
Because there's not really that much mortal wounding potential in the army. Like, relying on rolling a 6 to wound, I think we all know that that's your worst potential thing you can have, right? And the trick is, I say hidden because there wasn't really any high armor stuff floating around in the meta. Like, Stormcast was on the out now.
Yeah, Staunchcast had disappeared, like...
Right. And so there just wasn't anything you were running up against. And when the world stops at 4 up, Slaanesh does a lot of work. When the world is on 2 up or 3 up reroll 1s, Slaanesh bounces and then dies.
Well, this is something the meta is currently like having a rude awakening is the high armor meta. Like the high armor meta with Petrifex, even Mortis Praetorians gets a +1 to save within 36 inches,
right.
But even they can do that. So you're looking at those 3-ups and 2-ups, re-rolling if you got your shields. Like, high armor is a design space that has mercifully ebbed and flowed, and the ebb tide tends to take longer than the flow tide. One of the things, the army resilience we've seen has been in these redundant aftersaves, and redundant aftersaves are very good against the things that deal with high armor. So, like, we've seen the mortal wounds and these things kind of, like, dissipate from armies, and I think that people are having a rude awakening that with Petrifex, and who knows what Nurgle's going to look like, that you need to reevaluate high rend and mortal wounds. Like, you need to start running those again.
I agree. If beasts get a little bit more of a push, they could be a big player just solely through that. The fact that they have some interesting, like, rend options scattered throughout their army to really push it. Again, it's going to take more than what happened before, but we're trending in the right direction. So I think that they're one of those armies that could adapt to be stronger in the meta, depending on what it looks like. Yeah.
Oh, I agree 100%. I think that the
like
best.
I said, it'll take more than where they have been so far, but they're primed for, like, summertime or something, depending when all those new armies are out, depending on what other changes they got. Oh, they could suddenly see their value shoot way up.
Yeah, I mean, you've got some STD buff pieces that are pretty look pretty tasty too. Like the cat now not having to rely on a 6 to cast your Wildfire Taurus to play in the activation wars. The other thing I've noticed is, like, so you've got some, like, tools there.
Other than the fact that the cat is the worst in the current activation war interaction, because any ASF will override it. Yes, it's good.
Yeah. Well, you got Wildfire Taurus too, so you can double dip, man.
There you
go. No, I think they're primed really well. And Ungor Raiders are oddly they've always sat in a really great place in that army. Especially since you can give them rend, so they can become like rend 1 shooting. And I hope Bulgors go down another 20 points, so we start seeing those babies just really take over.
I, for one, would be happy and await our new Minotaur overlords.
Right on. So I think it's time for strange questions from strangers on the internet.
I've got a minute or two if we want to do it. That's fine.
Yep.
I need to get out here.
Yep. Okay, so I really just have one main question. So if you could paint one member of the community like one of your French girls, who would it be?
Sure. So who am I painting nude? Is that what you're asking me?
Well, it doesn't need to be nude. There could be a tasteful fig leaf.
Okay.
And it could be as a model rather than a portrait. Who would it be and why?
How about who would I make into a model?
There you go. Well, yeah.
Could be made into their own figure.
Yeah, who should be made?
Get really weird implications.
That's
the implications.
Because of implications.
Yes, but they wouldn't because of the implications. All right. Who in the community would I turn into who would I think would make an awesome basis for a model?
Yeah.
Boy, that's a tough one. Let me think about this for a minute. I'm gonna go with Maroc, like Maroc Wolf. Okay. In Canada, because he's already very wolfen in his features, and so I just want to see him be a werewolf pig, and he leads the new werewolf army. So there you go.
Perfect. I love it. And then the other one, more of a comment than a question, but I've been kicking around the idea of doing a Mystery Science Theater-esque watching of a Warhammer Weekly episode.
Sure.
Do you have an idea of what episode I should do that with, and who I should have on with me to be my like ensemble cast?
Oh boy, gosh, I don't know.
Hayward obviously comes on.
Sure, of course. He's definitely your Tom Servo, right? But you need a Crow.
Yeah.
You need like maybe get Tom on. He's a megalomaniac like Crow, so that's fine. and there you go. Yeah, I mean, I think you've got a good cast there. Like Tom can comment on his own work, and I think that'd be okay. I could also see. I think Bryce would be a good Crow too. He doesn't have the megalomania, but he's got that sharp, funny humor that Crow often had. So Bryce would be a good one.
Right on. Do you have an episode that I should roast? Is there one?
I mean, I'm sure there's plenty of them. I mean, More bad ones than good ones.
Oh man, thank you so much for being on tonight. Do you want to do some shameless self-promoting and/or promoting of others right now?
Sure. Just obviously, like, you should be subbed to Mr. Mephisto. If you're not, what are you doing with your life? Sub to him on Twitch. Sub to him over on YouTube once this goes up. Obviously, you can find me under my channel. If you're watching this, you probably know what I do, but it's Warhammer Weekly every Wednesday, Hobby Cheating every Saturday, and then anything else I can fit in between. I'll shout out the Undesign Podcast, which is my RPG focused podcast. If you enjoyed all this RPG talk, since it's one of the few chances I get to talk about it in detail, Undesign, it's available on iTunes, and you can get that there. And it's a 20-30 minute podcast that comes out once a week where we talk about RPGs and interesting elements of RPGs and playing RPGs and navigating that world. So there you go.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much, man, for being on. Come back sometime, huh?
I will, anytime, buddy. Anytime.
All right, chat gang, thank you for hanging out and really carrying our discussions tonight because we didn't know what to talk about. Like, subscribe, do all that stuff, and go hit up Vince and Tom on Warhammer Weekly every Wednesday because Wednesday is Warhammer. Good night, everybody. Have a great day.